Welcome, dear listener. Find a comfortable place to rest, let your breathing slow, and allow the weight of the day to gently dissolve. Tonight, we are going to drift together into the deep, quiet corridors of the ancient world. A journey back through centuries of mystery, wonder, and the enduring human desire to understand where we come from. There is no hurry. Simply close your eyes and let the story carry you. The tale of Atlantis does not begin beneath some shadowed ocean floor, nor among the crumbling inscriptions of a forgotten temple. It begins instead in the sunlit philosophical workshops of Athens, sometime around the 4th century before the Common Era, where a brilliant and restless thinker named Plato was quietly shaping what would become one of humanity's most persistent and captivating mysteries. Around the year 360 BC, this celebrated philosopher composed 2 dialogues that would ignite millennia of curiosity, exploration, and spirited debate. These works, known to us as the Timaeus and the Critias, stand as the only ancient sources through which we know anything at all about the lost civilization of Atlantis. This makes Plato simultaneously the sole witness and the possible inventor of one of history's greatest enigmas, a figure who stands at the very threshold between history and imagination. Within the Timaeus, Plato introduces Atlantis through the voice of a character named Critias, who claims to be passing along a story that had traveled through several generations before reaching him. According to this layered account, the great Athenian lawgiver Solon had journeyed to Egypt around 590 BC, where priests residing in the city of Sais revealed to him ancient records describing a mighty civilization that had flourished some 9,000 years before even their own time. These keepers of immense antiquity allegedly possessed detailed documentation of this vanished empire, preserved on temple columns and within sacred archives that no outside world had seen for generations. The air around such knowledge must have felt ancient and still, like the inside of a sealed chamber suddenly opened after centuries of quiet darkness. This initial mention in the Timaeus functions primarily as a prelude to Plato's broader cosmological discussions, but it carefully lays out the fundamental framework of the Atlantis story. Critias paints the picture of a naval power of extraordinary magnitude that had emerged from beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the name ancient peoples gave to what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, and had attempted to bring the entire Mediterranean world under its control. This aggressive empire had swept through parts of Europe and Asia before encountering its first true obstacle, the city of Athens, which stood alone against the Atlantean forces in a conflict whose outcome would shape the destiny of all known peoples. It is in the Critias dialogue, though regrettably left unfinished, that the most detailed portrait of Atlantean civilization emerges. Plato describes the island as larger than Libya and Asia combined, positioned somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean beyond the western boundaries of the ancient world. The geography he presents is remarkably precise, almost architectural in its careful organization. The island was circular in form, with alternating rings of land and water connected by bridges and tunnels, all arranged around a central citadel that housed the royal palace and the island's most sacred temples. One can almost imagine standing at the edge of such a place, watching the soft shimmer of water between bands of green earth, the whole construction rising in perfect concentric symmetry, like a vast and living mandala. According to Plato's account, Atlantis received its name from Atlas, the eldest son of the sea god Poseidon, who had divided the island among his 10 royal sons. Poseidon himself had fallen in love with a mortal woman named Clito, and, wishing to protect her, had shaped the island's distinctive concentric structure. 3 circular moats surrounded the central island where Clito lived, each channel of water separated by rings of land, creating a natural fortress that could be reached only by ship through a single carefully controlled passageway. The stillness of those inner waters must have been profound, insulated from wind and wave by layer upon layer of earth and stone. The central island, approximately 3 stades across, was home to magnificent structures that reflected the extraordinary architectural capabilities of the Atlanteans. The royal palace sprawled grandly across this space, constructed from stones of white, black, and red, quarried from the island itself, and arranged in decorative patterns that gave the buildings an almost supernatural radiance. At the heart of all this stood the primary temple, dedicated to Poseidon, a stade in length and 3 plethora wide, its exterior entirely covered in silver, with golden pinnacles gleaming at its heights. Inside, a colossal golden statue of Poseidon, driving 6 winged horses, stood so tall that his head nearly touched the roof. 100 Nereids riding dolphins surrounded the statue's base, representing the divine court of the sea. The walls of this extraordinary temple were inscribed with laws that Poseidon had established for the governance of his 10 kingdoms, along with the sacred rituals that the Atlantean kings performed when they gathered to make decisions about their shared empire. The military organization of Atlantean civilization was described with particular attention to its naval capabilities. The outermost ring of water, stretching some 50 stades across, served as a harbor for an immense fleet. The Atlanteans are said to have maintained 1,200 ships, each capable of carrying 240 fighting men. Their land forces were no less impressive: 720,000 infantry, 120,000 cavalry, and 10,000 chariots, suggesting a total military strength exceeding 2 million personnel, a number indicating a population far greater than that of any civilization known to the ancient world. It is a staggering image, an empire of such depth and reach that its edges must have seemed as distant and abstract as the horizon itself. The economic foundation of Atlantean society rested upon the island's extraordinary natural abundance. The land yielded 2 harvests each year, sustained both by rainfall and a sophisticated irrigation network that channeled water from central springs throughout the agricultural regions. Vast forests provided timber for construction and shipbuilding, while the island's mountains offered precious metals, including a mysterious substance Plato calls orichalcum, second only to gold in value, and found nowhere else in the known world. The very ground beneath Atlantean feet was generous and inexhaustible, as though the island itself had been designed for prosperity. The engineering achievements of the Atlanteans were considerable. They constructed bridges spanning each of the water rings, wide enough for the passage of vehicles, and carved tunnels through the land barriers large enough to accommodate ships. The outer defensive wall stretching around the largest land ring was coated in brass, the next in tin, and the wall surrounding the central citadel blazed with orichalcum that caught the light and flashed like living fire. Hot and cold springs channeled through an elaborate system of aqueducts and reservoirs supplied water throughout the city. Separate bathing facilities existed for kings, private citizens, women, and even horses and cattle, demonstrating both the sophistication of Atlantean engineering and the careful organization of their society. Gardens and exercise grounds occupied the land rings, while a racetrack for horses wound around the outermost ring in a single great circuit, long enough that one could walk it slowly and feel the distance accumulate with pleasant exhaustion. The religious practices of Atlantis centered on elaborate ceremonies held by the 10 kings each time they assembled to deliberate on matters of common concern. These gatherings occurred every 5 or 6 years, alternating to honor both odd and even numbers. The kings would hunt sacred bulls within the temple of Poseidon, using only wooden staves and woven nooses, never any weapon of iron. Once a bull was caught, it was sacrificed over the temple's inscribed laws, its blood mixed with wine, and drops poured as a dedication before each king drank from golden cups. As darkness settled over the temple, the kings would don robes of deep blue and sit in solemn judgment over matters brought before them, inscribing their decisions on golden tablets. At the ceremony's conclusion, all fires within the temple were extinguished, marking the transition from divine communion back to the ordinary weight of earthly governance. Plato presents the decline of Atlantean civilization as a slow and sorrowful corruption of what had once been a noble character. In the beginning, the Atlanteans possessed wisdom, virtue, and genuine restraint, governing their vast empire with justice and a measured hand. But as generations passed, and the divine heritage of Poseidon's bloodline grew thin through continued intermarriage with ordinary mortals, their character began to shift. Greed crept in, then ambition, and finally militarism, until the descendants of those first wise kings launched a campaign of conquest against the peoples of the Mediterranean. Plato's great insight here is moral as much as historical. The suggestion that power without virtue tends inevitably toward its own destruction. The particular timeline Plato provides places the Atlantean War at approximately 9600 BC, during a period when Athens itself existed as an ideal state, embodying the philosophical principles Plato would later articulate in his Republic. This prehistoric Athens possessed a perfect social structure, with distinct classes of warriors, craftsmen, and farmers, each fulfilling their designated role in service to the common good. The Athenian warrior class, numbering 20,000 men and women, lived communally without private property, dedicating themselves entirely to the defense of their city and the principles of justice. The contrast between these two civilizations, one ascending in virtue, one descending from it, gives Plato's narrative the quality of a moral fable written on a cosmic scale. The climactic war between Athens and Atlantis was more than a military event. In Plato's account, the Athenians stood as the sole defenders of freedom against Atlantean tyranny, their smaller but morally superior force confronting an empire that had already bent much of the known world to its will. The war's resolution depended not merely on arms, but on the deeper question of whether virtue or power would ultimately determine the shape of human civilization. The destruction of Atlantis itself came not through military defeat, but through divine intervention. Zeus, looking down upon the corruption that had consumed the Atlanteans, resolved to punish their hubris and restore the natural order of things. In a single day and night of catastrophic earthquakes and floods, the entire island disappeared beneath the ocean, leaving behind only impassable muddy shallows to mark where the great civilization had once stood. The swiftness of it, one day, one night, carries its own kind of terrible eloquence, the way a candle flame simply ceases when the air is taken from it. The abrupt end of the Critias dialogue at this precise moment has puzzled scholars for generations. Plato breaks off his narrative just as Zeus begins to gather the gods to pronounce final judgment upon Atlantis, leaving readers without the climactic scenes of destruction or the detailed account of Athenian victory. Whether Plato intended to continue the story in a third dialogue, or whether what we possess represents his complete vision, remains one of the most beguiling unanswered questions in all of ancient literature. The literary structure of both dialogues reveals Plato's extraordinarily careful approach to presenting the Atlantis narrative. Rather than claiming direct knowledge, he constructs multiple layers of transmission, each adding both distance and a kind of weight. Critias learned the story from his grandfather, who had heard it from Solon, who had received it from Egyptian priests, who had preserved it from records of unimaginable antiquity. This chain of transmission serves both to distance Plato from personal responsibility for its accuracy, and to lend the story the authority of wisdom, carefully protected across vast stretches of time. The Egyptian setting for Solon's discovery reflects the deep respect that ancient Greeks felt for Egyptian learning and antiquity. Egypt was understood as the storehouse of ancient knowledge, its priests maintaining traditions that stretched back far beyond anything Greek historical memory could contain. By grounding the Atlantis account in Egyptian temples, Plato drew upon that cultural reverence while providing a plausible explanation for how knowledge of such remote events could have survived at all. The detailed geographical and architectural descriptions Plato provides suggest either a remarkable consistency of imagination or access to genuine historical information. The concentric ring structure, the precise measurements, the engineering solutions for water management and transportation, all of this implies systematic planning that extends well beyond casual myth-making. Whether these details reflect Plato's philosophical symbolism, or the echo of actual historical memory, remains one of the central and endlessly fascinating questions surrounding the entire Atlantis tradition. The technological capabilities Plato attributes to the Atlanteans, their metallurgy, their architecture, their hydraulic engineering, their naval construction, surpass those of any known Bronze Age civilization, yet they remain within the realm of what an advanced ancient society might plausibly achieve given centuries of accumulated knowledge and experience. The mysterious orichalcum, the sophisticated harbor systems, the elaborate water management infrastructure, all point to a people who had solved complex engineering challenges through long generations of careful and dedicated inquiry. Long before Plato composed his philosophical dialogues in 4th century Athens, civilizations across the ancient world had already been preserving their own accounts of great floods, sunken lands, and vanished golden ages, stories that bear striking similarities to his vision of Atlantis. These pre-existing traditions suggest that when Plato crafted his narrative, he may have been drawing upon a vast and ancient reservoir of collective human memory, weaving together threads from multiple cultural sources into a single, enduring tapestry. The most ancient and detailed of these flood narratives comes from Mesopotamia, where the Epic of Gilgamesh preserves what may be humanity's oldest recorded account of a world-destroying deluge. Dating to approximately 2100 BC in its earliest Sumerian form, the epic reaches its most complete expression in the Akkadian version discovered in the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh. The flood story within the Epic of Gilgamesh centers on a man named Utnapishtim, who survived a catastrophic inundation that the gods unleashed upon humanity. An act born, across different versions of the story, from divine displeasure with human behavior. Utnapishtim's account describes a flood of such magnitude that even the gods themselves trembled before its destructive power. The waters rose for 6 days and 7 nights, submerging mountains and consuming all life except those aboard his carefully constructed vessel. When the deluge finally subsided, Utnapishtim released birds to test whether dry land had emerged from the receding waters, a detail that would surface again and again across numerous flood traditions in entirely different parts of the world. In recognition of the near-total destruction the gods had wrought, and as acknowledgement of Utnapishtim's role in preserving life itself, they granted him immortality. One can imagine him living on in some quiet and remote place, carrying in his memory the weight of a world that no longer existed. The Sumerian king list, compiled around 2100 BC, but drawing upon much older traditions, offers another crucial piece of evidence for antediluvian civilizations in Mesopotamian memory. This remarkable document records the reigns of kings who ruled before the Great Flood, attributing to them lifespans that stretched across millennia. Alulim of Eridu allegedly ruled for 28,800 years, while Dumuzi of Batibira governed for 36,000. 8 kings in total are listed as ruling for a combined 241,200 years before the flood swept their civilization away. After the flood, kingship descended from heaven once more, but the lifespans of rulers grew dramatically shorter, as if the catastrophe had altered something fundamental in the nature of human existence, as though the world itself had aged overnight and could no longer sustain the same depth of life it once had. The Mesopotamian accounts gain additional significance through their connection to still earlier Sumerian flood myths, particularly the story of Ziusudra, whose name means life of distant days. He receives divine warning of the coming flood through dreams and direct divine communication. The fragmentary tablets preserving his story describe a deluge lasting 7 days and nights, after which Ziusudra makes offerings to the gods and receives the gift of eternal life. These earlier versions establish the deep antiquity of flood traditions in Mesopotamian culture and demonstrate how they evolved and accumulated meaning over time. Egyptian records contribute yet another layer to the pre-Platonic tradition of lost lands and ancient wisdom. The Turin king list and the Abydos king list both reference dynasties of gods and demigods who ruled Egypt before the first human pharaohs, suggesting an Egyptian awareness of a remote past when divine beings governed the Nile Valley directly. Manetho, the Egyptian priest and historian who compiled Egyptian chronology for Ptolemy II around 280 BC, wrote of the Zep Tepi, the first time, when the gods themselves ruled Egypt. This concept of a primordial age of divine governance preceding human history echoes throughout Plato's account of Atlantis, where the island's earliest rulers were literal sons of Poseidon. The Egyptian priests whom Solon allegedly encountered at Sais represented a tradition of preserved ancient knowledge that their temples maintained through meticulous record-keeping. The priests of Neith at Sais claimed their temple had been founded 8,000 years before Solon's visit, and they possessed records extending to the very beginning of Egyptian civilization. According to Plato's account, these priests gently chided the Greeks for their historical ignorance, explaining that periodic catastrophes had repeatedly destroyed human civilization, leaving only scattered survivors to rebuild from the most basic conditions. They described these cyclical destructions as resulting from celestial phenomena, sometimes fire falling from above, sometimes vast floods that periodically washed the earth clean of accumulated human civilization. They claimed that Egypt's unique geographical position protected it from the worst of these catastrophes, allowing Egyptian archives to preserve knowledge that other cultures had entirely forgotten. Egyptian texts also reference mysterious lands beyond their borders that had been swallowed by water or sand. The pyramid texts mention an island of fire and other mythical locations associated with the afterlife journey, while later papyri describe lands in the west where the sun died each evening. These references, while primarily mythological in character, may preserve dim memories of actual geographical changes that occurred in the ancient Mediterranean and Atlantic regions over long periods. Hindu Puranic literature offers perhaps the most sophisticated framework for understanding cyclical civilizations and their destruction. The concept of yugas, great cosmic ages, describes vast periods of time during which human civilization rises and falls according to divine plan. The Dvapara Yuga, the third of 4 ages in each cosmic cycle, represents a period when civilization achieved great technological and spiritual heights before declining into the present Kali Yuga, an age of darkness and moral decay. The Mahabharata and various Puranas describe advanced civilizations of the Dvapara Yuga that possessed flying vehicles called vimanas, powerful weapons capable of destroying entire armies, and knowledge of metallurgy, astronomy, and medicine that surpassed later achievements. The Matsya Purana recounts a great flood at the end of the previous cosmic cycle, in which Vishnu in his fish avatar saved humanity and the seeds of all life from total destruction. This flood narrative bears striking similarities to Mesopotamian accounts, including the preservation of life aboard a great vessel guided by divine instruction. The Hindu tradition, however, places this event within a cosmological framework of almost incomprehensible scope, spanning millions of years and countless cycles of creation and destruction, giving the flood not merely a historical, but a cosmic dimension. The concept of Atlantis finds particular resonance in Hindu accounts of Dwarka, the golden city of Krishna that sank beneath the ocean following the god's departure from Earth. The Mahabharata describes Dwarka as a magnificent city with sophisticated harbor facilities, elaborate palaces, and advanced defensive systems, all of which disappeared beneath the waves in a single day. Archaeological investigations off the coast of Gujarat have revealed submerged structures that some researchers associate with this legendary city, though their precise dating and interpretation remain subjects of ongoing scholarly discussion. Greek mythological traditions predating Plato contain numerous references to sunken lands, great floods, and lost golden ages that may have formed part of the imaginative world from which his Atlantis narrative emerged. The myth of Deucalion's flood, preserved in various forms by ancient authors, describes a world-destroying deluge that Zeus sent to punish human wickedness. Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha survived through divine guidance, and after the waters receded, they repopulated the earth by casting stones behind them that transformed into human beings. This Greek flood myth shares essential elements with Mesopotamian and Hindu traditions: divine displeasure with human behavior, catastrophic flooding, a righteous couple who survives through divine guidance, and the subsequent renewal of human civilization. Greek traditions also preserved memories of earlier golden ages when humanity lived in harmony with the gods and enjoyed lives of extraordinary length and prosperity. Hesiod's Works and Days describes 5 ages of humanity, beginning with a golden age when people lived like gods, free from toil and suffering, and gradually declining through silver, bronze, and heroic ages toward the current Iron Age of hardship and moral decay. This cyclical understanding of history, with its emphasis on decline from an original state of perfection, provides the conceptual atmosphere within which Plato's account of Atlantean corruption and destruction makes perfect sense. The Greek concept of kataklysmos, from which our word cataclysm derives, specifically referred to great floods that periodically destroyed human civilization. Aristotle, Plato's own student, wrote about these recurring catastrophes as natural phenomena that prevented society from accumulating complete knowledge of the past. This understanding of cyclical destruction may have directly influenced how Plato chose to present the Atlantis story, as a fragment of recovered ancient knowledge that had survived one such devastating event, like an ember carried through a long and terrible night. Various Greek myths reference specific sunken lands and lost territories. The story of the Aegean island of Atalante which disappeared beneath the waves during an earthquake, provided a local and relatively recent example of sudden geological catastrophe that could have informed Plato's description of Atlantis' destruction. Similarly, accounts of lands lost to coastal erosion or seismic activity around the Greek islands demonstrated that the Mediterranean world had experienced significant geographical changes within living or near-living memory. The Orphic traditions, which claim to preserve ancient wisdom from the legendary poet Orpheus, included accounts of primordial floods and the cyclical destruction of human civilizations. These mystery traditions, which deeply influenced Plato's own philosophical development, emphasized the soul's journey through multiple incarnations and the possibility of recovering lost knowledge through spiritual discipline. The Orphic understanding of time as cyclical rather than linear provided a philosophical framework for understanding how ancient wisdom might survive catastrophic historical ruptures. Greek philosophical schools before Plato had already developed sophisticated theories about historical cycles and the relationship between cosmic events and human civilization. The Pythagoreans taught that celestial movements influenced earthly affairs according to mathematical principles, while early Stoic thinkers proposed that the universe underwent periodic destruction and renewal through cosmic fire. These philosophical frameworks provided intellectual tools for understanding how advanced civilizations might rise and fall according to natural law, rather than by mere chance or random misfortune. The accumulation of these diverse traditions across multiple cultures suggests that when Plato crafted his Atlantis narrative, he was drawing upon a rich and ancient reservoir of collective memory. Whether these traditions preserve actual historical events or represent archetypal patterns of human response to environmental catastrophe, they demonstrate that the basic elements of the Atlantis story, advanced civilization, moral decline, catastrophic destruction, resonated with deep and widespread cultural memories about lost golden ages and world-destroying floods. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century of the Common Era marked not merely the end of political unity, but the beginning of a profound transformation in how ancient knowledge traveled across cultural boundaries. While European monasteries preserved fragments of classical learning within their scriptoriums, it was the Islamic world that became the primary custodian of Greek philosophical texts, including the complete dialogues of Plato, that contained the only ancient account of Atlantis. This great act of preservation would prove crucial for the eventual rediscovery of the lost continent narrative during the Renaissance. But the medieval Islamic engagement with Plato's story also added new dimensions that would influence all subsequent interpretations. The translation movement that flourished in Baghdad during the 8th and 9th centuries under the Abbasid Caliphate represented one of history's most systematic efforts to preserve and transmit the knowledge of antiquity. The House of Wisdom, established by Caliph Harun al-Rashid and expanded under his successor al-Ma'mun, became the center of an unprecedented scholarly enterprise that sought to collect, translate, and comment upon the philosophical and scientific works of ancient civilizations. Greek manuscripts arrived in Baghdad through various channels, some through diplomatic exchanges with the Byzantine Empire, others discovered in Syrian monasteries, still others purchased from Christian and Jewish scholars who had maintained private collections through the chaotic centuries following Rome's decline. The libraries of that city must have felt like islands of preserved light in an otherwise darkened world. The Platonic corpus presented particular challenges for Islamic translators, who encountered philosophical concepts requiring careful adaptation to Islamic theological frameworks. Hunayn ibn Ishaq, perhaps the most accomplished translator of the 9th century, produced Arabic versions of both the Timaeus and the Critias that would serve as the foundation for all subsequent Islamic discussions of Atlantis. His approach involved far more than literal translation. He provided extensive commentary that attempted to reconcile Plato's cosmological theories with Islamic understanding of divine creation and historical providence. Islamic scholars approached the Atlantis narrative with a sophisticated hermeneutical framework that distinguished between different levels of meaning within ancient texts. Al-Farabi, the 10th century philosopher known as the second teacher after Aristotle, interpreted Plato's account as a philosophical allegory designed to illustrate principles of political science and moral philosophy. In his work on the perfect state, Al-Farabi argued that Atlantis represented the inevitable corruption that befalls any society abandoning virtue in favor of material prosperity and military power, a reading that aligned the Atlantis story with Islamic teachings about the rise and fall of nations according to their adherence to divine guidance. The 11th century polymath Ibn Sina, known in the Latin West as Avicenna, developed a more complex reading that saw Atlantis as both historical reality and philosophical symbol. In his commentary on Plato's Timaeus, he argued that the detailed geographical and architectural descriptions suggested genuine historical knowledge, while the moral framework of the narrative served didactic purposes. He proposed that ancient civilizations had indeed achieved remarkable technological capabilities before being destroyed by natural catastrophe, a view that resonated with Quranic accounts of previous nations punished for their transgressions. The idea carried the particular gravity of a lesson written not in books, but in the very shape of the earth. The Andalusian philosopher Ibn Rushd, known as Averroes in medieval Europe, contributed another layer of interpretation that would prove influential during the Renaissance. Writing in 12th century Cordoba, he argued that Plato's Atlantis represented a perfect example of how rational inquiry could recover historical truth from mythological narratives. He maintained that careful analysis of ancient accounts, combined with geographical and natural philosophical investigation, could potentially locate the physical remains of lost civilizations. This methodological approach, emphasizing empirical investigation alongside textual analysis, would later inspire Renaissance scholars to undertake systematic searches for Atlantean remnants. Islamic geographers incorporated the Atlantis tradition into their expanding knowledge of world geography, often attempting to reconcile Plato's account with contemporary exploration and trade route information. Al-Masudi, the 10th century historian and geographer, included discussions of Atlantis in his comprehensive chronicle, The Meadows of Gold. He suggested that the Atlantic Ocean contained numerous islands that might represent remnants of the lost continent, and collected accounts from Arab navigators who claimed to have encountered mysterious ruins on uninhabited Atlantic islands. These reports arrived in the great scholarly cities like messages from an unmapped distance, tantalizing, uncertain, and deeply compelling. The 12th century geographer Al-Idrisi, working at the Norman court in Sicily, created world maps that attempted to incorporate Platonic geography alongside contemporary geographical knowledge. His maps showed the Atlantic dotted with islands, some labeled as potential Atlantean remnants, demonstrating how Islamic cartographers sought to anchor ancient accounts in observable geographical reality. Al-Idrisi's work proved particularly influential because it synthesized Greek, Arab, and Norman geographical knowledge, producing a more comprehensive picture of the Atlantic world than had previously existed. The preservation of Platonic texts in Arabic also facilitated their transmission to Jewish scholars who developed their own interpretations within Kabbalistic and philosophical frameworks. Maimonides, the great 12th century Jewish philosopher, encountered Plato's account through Arabic translations, and incorporated elements of the Atlantis story into his discussions of ancient history and divine providence. In his Guide for the Perplexed, he suggested that accounts of antediluvian civilizations, including Atlantis, preserved genuine historical memories that had been corrupted through oral transmission, but retained essential truths about human potential and divine judgment. The translation of Arabic philosophical works into Latin during the 12th and 13th centuries marked the beginning of Atlantis' return to European consciousness. The school of translators in Toledo became a crucial conduit for this knowledge transfer, where scholars like Gerard of Cremona and Michael Scott rendered Arabic commentaries on Plato into Latin. These translations often included Islamic interpretations alongside the original Greek material, creating a layered textual tradition that would color European understanding of Atlantis for centuries to come. The Renaissance erupted across Europe with an extraordinary enthusiasm for recovering ancient wisdom, and the rediscovery of complete Platonic texts in Greek manuscripts brought Atlantis back into European intellectual discourse with renewed vigor. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 prompted an exodus of Byzantine scholars who carried precious manuscripts to Italian courts, where humanist patrons eagerly sponsored translation projects and philosophical academies dedicated to reviving classical learning. Marsilio Ficino's complete Latin translation of Plato's Dialogues, completed in 1484 under the patronage of Cosimo de' Medici, made the Atlantis narrative accessible to European scholars in a more direct form than had been available since antiquity. The Platonic Academy of Florence, humming with illuminated candles and learned conversation, became a center for discussions about ancient wisdom traditions and their relationship to contemporary learning. Ficino's approach to the Atlantis story reflected the Renaissance synthesis of Christian theology, Platonic philosophy, and Hermetic mysticism that characterized Florentine intellectual circles. In his commentary on the Timaeus, he argued that Plato's account preserved authentic ancient wisdom that complemented rather than contradicted Christian revelation. That Atlantis represented a civilization which had achieved remarkable knowledge of natural philosophy and divine mysteries before being destroyed for its moral failures, a pattern demonstrating God's consistent judgment throughout history. Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, the brilliant young philosopher who joined the Platonic Academy in the 1480s, developed a syncretic interpretation that connected Atlantis to Egyptian, Chaldean, and Hebrew wisdom traditions. In his Oration on the Dignity of Man, Pico suggested that ancient civilizations like Atlantis had possessed complete knowledge of natural and divine mysteries, partially preserved in various esoteric traditions that Renaissance scholars might potentially reconstruct through careful and devoted study. The Renaissance fascination with ancient wisdom extended beyond philosophical circles into the practical domains of cartography, navigation, and maritime exploration. The age of discovery that began in the 15th century was driven partly by humanist scholars who believed that ancient accounts might guide them to undiscovered lands and forgotten civilizations. Christopher Columbus himself studied classical geographical texts, including references to Atlantic islands that he hoped might represent Atlantean remnants. His marginal notes in his copy of Pierre Dailly's Imago Mundi reveal his interest in Platonic geography and his belief that systematic exploration could verify what ancient accounts described. The Spanish encounter with the Americas added extraordinary new dimensions to Renaissance discussions of Atlantis. European scholars encountered civilizations that seemed, in certain respects, to echo Plato's descriptions in remarkable ways. The Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan built on an island in Lake Texcoco, with elaborate causeways and hydraulic engineering, struck many observers as strikingly similar to Plato's description of Atlantean architecture. Francisco Lopez de Gomara, in his General History of the Indies, published in 1552, explicitly compared Tenochtitlan to Atlantis, and suggested that the Americas might represent either Atlantean colonies that had survived the original catastrophe, or perhaps the continent itself, partially submerged, but retaining populations that had preserved something of ancient knowledge and custom. The Jesuit scholar José de Acosta developed this connection further in his Natural and Moral History of the Indies, published in 1590. Acosta argued that the advanced astronomical knowledge, sophisticated agriculture, and monumental architecture found throughout the Americas indicated contact with an ancient civilization possessing superior learning. He proposed that Atlantis might have served as an intermediary between old and new world civilizations, explaining both the similarities and the differences between American and European cultural achievements. Renaissance cartographers began producing maps that attempted to locate Atlantis based on careful analysis of Plato's geographical descriptions combined with contemporary exploration reports. The German cartographer Sebastian Münster included speculative Atlantic islands on his world maps, labeling some as potential Atlantean remnants. His Cosmographia, published in multiple editions throughout the 16th century, influenced European geographical imagination by presenting Atlantis as a legitimate subject for cartographic investigation, rather than mere philosophical fantasy. The most significant cartographic attempt to locate Atlantis came from the work of Athanasius Kircher, the remarkable Jesuit polymath whose interests spanned geology, linguistics, archaeology, and natural philosophy. Kircher's 1665 map of Atlantis, published in his Mundus Subterraneus, represented the first systematic attempt to reconstruct Atlantean geography based on rigorous analysis of Plato's texts combined with contemporary geological and oceanographic knowledge. The map positioned Atlantis as a large island between Europe and America, illustrating how the lost continent might have served as a bridge between the two hemispheres of the known world. Kircher's reconstruction drew upon his extensive geological investigations, which had convinced him that major changes in the Earth's surface occurred through volcanic activity and seismic events. His studies of Mount Vesuvius and other active volcanoes led him to propose that Atlantis had been destroyed by massive geological upheaval, capable of submerging an entire continent within a short period. This geological approach to the Atlantis problem represented a significant departure from purely textual analysis, introducing empirical investigation into what had previously been primarily a philosophical question. The island's distinctive concentric ring structure appeared prominently at the center of the map, surrounded by additional land masses that Kircher interpreted as Atlantean colonies or associated territories. In his Mundus Subterraneus, Kircher proposed that the Earth's interior contained vast networks of underground fires and waters that could produce catastrophic surface changes when their natural balance was disturbed. He argued that Atlantis had been positioned above a particularly unstable geological formation that eventually collapsed, creating what contemporary oceanographic studies were beginning to identify as the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. This early geological approach to the Atlantis problem would influence later scientific investigations and establish a tradition of seeking physical evidence for Plato's account. The emergence of Atlantis within Renaissance alchemical and Hermetic traditions represented another crucial development. The Renaissance revival of Hermetic philosophy, based on texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus and believed to preserve ancient Egyptian wisdom, created a framework for understanding Atlantis as a repository of lost magical and scientific knowledge. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, in his influential 3 Books of Occult Philosophy, published in 1533, connected Atlantis to the Hermetic tradition of Prisca Theologia, the ancient theology believed to have preceded and informed all later religious and philosophical traditions. He argued that Atlantean civilization had possessed complete knowledge of natural magic, astrology, and divine mysteries, partially preserved in Egyptian, Chaldean, and Hebrew esoteric traditions. The image it conjured was of ancient knowledge scattered like seeds across the world, waiting for the conditions that would allow it to germinate once more. The alchemical interpretation of Atlantis found further expression through the work of Paracelsus, the Swiss physician and natural philosopher who transformed Renaissance medicine. Paracelsus argued that ancient civilizations had possessed superior knowledge of medical and chemical arts that had been lost through historical catastrophe. He suggested that Atlantean physicians had understood fundamental principles of disease and healing that modern practitioners were only beginning to rediscover through alchemical research. The Rosicrucian manifestos that appeared in early 17th century Germany explicitly connected their movement to ancient wisdom traditions preserved from antediluvian civilizations. The Fama Fraternitatis and Confessio Fraternitatis described a secret brotherhood possessing ancient learning from before the Great Flood. While these texts did not mention Atlantis explicitly, their descriptions of lost technological and spiritual achievements resonated strongly with Renaissance interpretations of Plato's account, and the Rosicrucian emphasis on recovering ancient wisdom through systematic study and spiritual discipline provided a practical framework for those who believed Atlantean knowledge might one day be recovered. The Hermetic tradition also contributed to Renaissance discussions of Atlantean chronology and its relationship to biblical history. Scholars like Giovanni Agno da Viterbo attempted to reconcile Plato's dating of Atlantis with biblical chronology, proposing that the lost continent had existed during the period between creation and Noah's flood. This framework allowed Christian scholars to accept Atlantis as historical reality, while maintaining biblical authority over human origins and early history, producing an intellectual synthesis that influenced European thinking about ancient civilization for several centuries. The arrival of Spanish conquistadors on the shores of the New World in the early 16th century created an intellectual earthquake that reverberated through European scholarly circles with unprecedented force. As reports filtered back across the Atlantic describing magnificent cities built on islands, sophisticated hydraulic engineering systems, and civilizations that seemed to echo Plato's ancient descriptions in specific and sometimes startling ways, Renaissance thinkers found themselves confronting the tantalizing possibility that Atlantis might not be a philosophical allegory at all, but a historical reality whose remnants had survived in the Americas. Hernán Cortés's first view of Tenochtitlan on November 8, 1519, provided what many scholars would later consider the most compelling parallel to Plato's Atlantis encountered during the entire age of exploration. The Aztec capital rose from the waters of Lake Texcoco like a vision from classical antiquity, its carefully planned layout featuring concentric zones connected by raised causeways stretching across the lake's surface. The Spanish chronicler Bernal Díaz del Castillo described approaching the city through a network of canals where thousands of canoes moved in organized patterns, their occupants conducting trade and transportation with an efficiency that reminded the conquistadors of Venice at its height. The light must have been extraordinary, reflecting off the water, off the white stone buildings, off the polished surfaces of temples that rose above everything else. The architectural sophistication that greeted the Spanish exceeded anything they had expected to encounter in the New World. Tenochtitlan's central ceremonial precinct contained massive pyramidal temples whose surfaces bore carved stone reliefs depicting complex mythological scenes. The royal palace complex sprawled across several acres, containing hundreds of rooms arranged around courtyards filled with exotic plants and fountains fed by an intricate aqueduct system. Gardens floated on artificial islands throughout the lake, their carefully tended crops demonstrating agricultural techniques that maximized limited land resources through innovative engineering solutions. The hydraulic engineering that sustained Tenochtitlan particularly impressed Spanish observers. The Aztecs had constructed dikes and sluices that controlled the lake's water levels, preventing floods during rainy seasons while maintaining adequate depth for navigation during dry periods. Fresh water arrived through stone aqueducts, carrying mountain spring water across miles of difficult terrain, terminating in distribution systems that supplied different districts of the city according to carefully planned hierarchies. Waste management incorporated sophisticated drainage systems that channeled sewage away from residential areas while collecting organic matter for agricultural fertilization. The sheer organizational intelligence implied by all of this was difficult for the Spanish to fully absorb. Francisco López de Gómara, who never visited the Americas but compiled detailed accounts from conquistador reports, became the first European scholar to explicitly connect Tenochtitlan with Plato's Atlantis in his General History of the Indies, published in 1552. He noted that the Aztec capital matched Plato's description in numerous specific details: its island location, concentric organization, sophisticated water management, and sudden destruction by foreign invaders. He argued that the Americas represented either Atlantean colonies that had survived the original catastrophe, or perhaps the continent itself, partially submerged, but retaining populations that had preserved ancient knowledge and customs through the long centuries. The Spanish encounters with Inca civilization in Peru added another layer of evidence for those seeking Atlantean connections in the New World. Francisco Pizarro's expedition through the Andes revealed engineering achievements that seemed to surpass even Aztec capabilities, particularly in the realm of stone construction and metallurgy. The fortress of Sacsayhuaman above Cusco contained massive stone blocks fitted together with such precision that Spanish engineers could not understand how they had been quarried, transported, and positioned without advanced machinery. Some individual stones weighed over 100 tons, yet they had been shaped and fitted with tolerances measured in millimeters. Standing before such walls must have induced a peculiar kind of vertigo, the sense of confronting evidence of a capability that exceeded ready explanation. Inca metallurgical techniques produced alloys and decorative objects that Spanish chroniclers compared to the mysterious orichalcum mentioned in Plato's account. The Spanish encountered vast quantities of worked gold and silver, including objects that combined different metals in ways that European smiths found difficult to replicate. The Inca had developed techniques for working platinum, a metal that European technology could not process until the 18th century, and they produced bronze alloys superior to contemporary European versions. These metallurgical achievements suggested access to advanced technical knowledge that seemed inconsistent with the stone tool technology the Spanish observed in other aspects of Inca material culture. The agricultural terraces covering Andean mountainsides demonstrated landscape modification on a scale that deeply impressed Spanish observers. The Inca had constructed thousands of miles of stone-faced terraces, converting steep mountain slopes into productive farmland, incorporating sophisticated drainage systems that prevented erosion while maintaining soil fertility. These terraces required precise engineering calculations to ensure proper water flow and structural stability, indicating mathematical and engineering knowledge that European scholars associated with classical Mediterranean civilizations, rather than with the peoples of the New World. Spanish chroniclers also recorded indigenous oral traditions that seemed to preserve memories of great floods and lost civilizations. The Aztec creation myth described previous worlds destroyed by various catastrophes, including floods that had obliterated earlier human civilizations. The Inca maintained traditions about Viracocha, a creator deity who emerged from Lake Titicaca to establish civilization after a great flood destroyed the previous world. These flood narratives bore striking similarities to Old World traditions, suggesting either common origins or the independent development of remarkably similar mythological patterns in response to similar human experiences. The Jesuit missionary José de Acosta provided the most systematic analysis of potential connections between American civilizations and classical antiquity in his Natural and Moral History of the Indies, published in 1590. Having spent 15 years in Peru and Mexico, he brought direct experience with indigenous cultures that most European scholars entirely lacked. He argued that the astronomical knowledge demonstrated by American civilizations indicated contact with advanced mathematical traditions traceable to ancient Mediterranean sources. The Aztec and Inca calendars displayed sophisticated understanding of planetary cycles and seasonal variations that required centuries of systematic observation and mathematical analysis. Acosta noted that American civilizations had developed writing systems, architectural techniques, and social organizations that paralleled classical Mediterranean achievements while displaying distinctive characteristics suggesting independent development from common sources. He proposed that Atlantis might have served as an intermediary civilization, transmitting advanced knowledge to both Old and New World peoples before its destruction. A diffusionist interpretation that would influence European thinking about cultural transmission for centuries. The Jesuit missionary network spreading throughout the Americas during the 16th and 17th centuries provided an unprecedented opportunity for systematic documentation of indigenous traditions. Jesuit scholars trained in classical languages and philosophy were uniquely positioned to recognize potential connections between American cultures and ancient Mediterranean civilizations. Their detailed reports back to European headquarters contain ethnographic observations that would later be mined carefully by scholars seeking evidence for Atlantean connections. Father Bernabé Cobo, who spent 43 years in Peru during the early 17th century, compiled extensive records of Inca oral traditions describing advanced civilizations existing before the historical Inca Empire. These traditions spoke of the Viracocha people, who possessed superior knowledge of architecture, agriculture, and astronomy before disappearing suddenly, leaving behind the massive stone constructions that later Inca attributed to divine rather than human agency. Cobo's careful documentation provided European scholars with detailed accounts of indigenous memories about lost civilizations that seemed to parallel classical accounts of Atlantis. Father Diego de Landa's documentation of Maya civilization in the Yucatan Peninsula revealed another American culture with achievements that impressed European observers. The Maya had developed the most sophisticated writing system in the pre-Columbian Americas, producing thousands of books recording their history, astronomy, and religious practices. Their astronomical observations achieved accuracy levels that surpassed contemporary European knowledge, particularly in calculating planetary cycles and predicting eclipses. Maya architecture incorporated advanced engineering principles including the Korbeld Arch and complex water management systems that sustained large urban populations in challenging tropical environments. The Maya calendar system demonstrated mathematical sophistication that European scholars found remarkable, incorporating multiple interlocking cycles, tracking time periods ranging from single days to vast cosmic epochs spanning millions of years. The sudden abandonment of major Maya cities during the 9th century AD provided another parallel to accounts of Atlantean destruction, suggesting that advanced American civilizations had experienced catastrophic collapses that left little trace beyond the silent, overgrown stones of their greatest monuments. Father Francisco Jimenez's translation of the Popol Vuh in early 18th century Guatemala provided European scholars with detailed Maya creation mythology, including accounts of previous worlds destroyed by floods and other catastrophes. The text described multiple attempts by the gods to create suitable human beings, with earlier versions being destroyed when they failed to properly honor their creators. The final flood that destroyed the wooden people bore striking similarities to old world flood narratives, including the survival of a few individuals who became the ancestors of the current human race. The same essential story, told with entirely different characters across an ocean of separation. Meanwhile, in Europe, Francis Bacon was developing his own interpretation of Atlantean themes that would profoundly influence utopian literature and political theory for centuries. His unfinished work, New Atlantis, published posthumously in 1627, reimagined Plato's lost continent as an ideal scientific society that had survived its original catastrophe and continued to flourish in secret isolation. Bacon's Bensalem represented a civilization achieving perfect harmony between scientific advancement and moral virtue, suggesting that the corruption that had destroyed the original Atlantis could be overcome through proper social organization and dedication to natural philosophy. Bacon's scientific utopia featured institutions that would later inspire the creation of the Royal Society and other European scientific academies. Salomon's House, the central research institution of Bensalem, conducted systematic investigations into all aspects of natural philosophy, from astronomy and mathematics to medicine and engineering. The scholars of Salomon's House had developed technologies surpassing contemporary European achievements, including flying machines, submarines, and advanced metallurgical techniques that seemed to echo classical descriptions of Atlantean capabilities. The influence of Bacon's New Atlantis extended far beyond literature into practical politics and social reform movements. European intellectuals began envisioning ideal societies that could achieve the scientific and moral perfection Bacon had attributed to Bensalem. The Massachusetts Bay Colony founders explicitly drew inspiration from Baconian ideals, hoping to create a city upon a hill, demonstrating the possibility of social perfection through proper religious and scientific education. Similar utopian communities throughout the Americas would continue drawing inspiration from Atlantean themes for centuries. The Swedish scholar Olaf Rudbeck developed perhaps the most systematic attempt to locate Atlantis within European geography through his monumental work Atland eller Mannheim, published in 4 volumes between 1679 and 1702. Rudbeck argued that Sweden represented the original location of Plato's Atlantis, using linguistic analysis, archaeological evidence, and geographical reasoning to support his controversial thesis. He noted that the Swedish landscape contained numerous features matching Plato's descriptions, including circular formations that could represent the concentric rings of the Atlantean capital. Rudbeck's linguistic arguments drew upon his extensive knowledge of ancient languages and comparative philology to demonstrate connections between Swedish place names and terms in Plato's account. These etymological connections, while speculative by modern standards, represented serious scholarly attempts to anchor Platonic geography in observable European landscapes and linguistic patterns. The archaeological evidence he marshaled included ancient stone circles, burial mounds, and other megalithic structures scattered throughout Scandinavia that he interpreted as remnants of Atlantean civilization. Rudbeck's geographical arguments focused on the extent of post-glacial land changes in Scandinavia, which geological evidence suggested had been much more substantial during ancient times. He proposed that the Baltic Sea had originally been a much smaller body of water, surrounded by lands that could have supported the large population and extensive agriculture that Plato attributed to Atlantis. The chronological framework he developed attempted to reconcile Plato's dating with biblical chronology by proposing that the 9,000 years mentioned should be understood as referring to lunar rather than solar years, a revision that placed Atlantean civilization within a historical period when Scandinavian cultures had achieved their greatest extent. The Industrial Revolution, sweeping across Europe and America during the 19th century, created an unprecedented appetite for systematic knowledge and scientific methodology, transforming every field of human inquiry from archaeology to geology. Within this intellectual ferment, the ancient mystery of Atlantis found new life through scholars who applied emerging scientific principles to Plato's enigmatic account. The Romantic movement's fascination with lost civilizations merged with positivist demands for empirical evidence, producing the first systematic attempts to prove Atlantis's historical reality through careful analysis of geological, archaeological, and ethnographic data. The air of that century smelled of coal smoke and discovery, and somewhere within it, Atlantis breathed again. Ignatius Donnelly emerged as the most influential figure in this transformation, bringing to the Atlantis question the methodical approach of a trained lawyer combined with the passionate conviction of a true believer. Born in Philadelphia in 1831, Donnelly had established himself as a successful politician and social reformer before turning his attention to ancient mysteries. When he published Atlantis, the Antediluvian World in 1882, he created what would become the foundational text of modern Atlantology, establishing methodological frameworks and evidentiary standards that would influence researchers for generations. Donnelly's systematic approach began with careful analysis of Plato's text, treating the dialogues as historical documents rather than philosophical allegories. He argued that the specific details Plato provided about Atlantean geography, architecture, and customs demonstrated access to genuine historical information rather than pure imagination. The precision of measurements, the consistency of geographical descriptions, and the integration of technological details suggested that Plato had drawn upon authentic ancient sources, possibly Egyptian records preserving memories of actual events. He believed the specificity of Plato's account was itself a kind of argument, the way a precisely detailed dream feels different from a vague one. The geological evidence Donnelly assembled represented perhaps his most innovative contribution to Atlantean studies. Working with contemporary geological theories about catastrophism and uniformitarianism, he argued that the Earth's surface had experienced dramatic changes within relatively recent historical periods. The discovery of massive volcanic deposits in the Atlantic Ocean suggested that major geological upheavals had occurred in the precise region where Plato had located Atlantis. Donnelly pointed to the mid-Atlantic ridge as potential evidence of a sunken land mass, noting that deep sea soundings had revealed an underwater mountain range that could represent remnants of a submerged continent. The debate between catastrophism and uniformitarianism that dominated 19th century geology provided crucial context for Donnelly's arguments. Catastrophists like Georges Cuvier argued that the Earth's geological features resulted from sudden violent events capable of rapidly transforming entire landscapes. Uniformitarians like Charles Lyell maintained that geological changes occurred gradually through processes still observable in the present. Donnelly skillfully drew upon both traditions, using uniformitarian principles to explain how Atlantean civilization could have developed over long periods, while invoking catastrophist mechanisms to account for its sudden destruction. Donnelly's analysis of volcanic activity in the Atlantic region drew upon the most current geological research available in the 1880s. The eruption of Krakatoa in 1883, occurring shortly after his book's publication, provided dramatic confirmation of his arguments about volcanic catastrophism. The explosion had been heard 3,000 miles away and had created atmospheric effects visible worldwide, demonstrating that volcanic events could indeed cause rapid and extensive environmental changes. He argued that similar but far larger volcanic events in the Atlantic could have destroyed an entire continent within the time frame Plato described. The archaeological evidence Donnelly presented represented a comprehensive survey of contemporary discoveries in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Americas. The decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphs by Jean-François Champollion had revealed the antiquity and sophistication of Nile Valley civilization, while excavations at Nineveh and Babylon were uncovering the extent of Mesopotamian achievements. These discoveries demonstrated that advanced civilizations had existed much earlier than previously believed, supporting Donnelly's argument that Atlantean civilization could have achieved remarkable sophistication during prehistoric periods. Donnelly's comparative analysis of American and Old World civilizations built upon earlier work by Spanish chroniclers and Jesuit missionaries, but he approached the evidence with systematic rigor that his predecessors had lacked. He documented specific parallels in architectural techniques, astronomical knowledge, religious symbolism, and agricultural practices that suggested either common origins or direct cultural transmission. The pyramid building traditions found in both Egypt and the Americas particularly impressed him. He argued that such complex architectural achievements could not have developed independently without some form of cultural contact reaching back to a common ancient source. The metallurgical evidence Donnelly assembled included detailed analysis of bronze working techniques, gold working methods, and complex alloys found in both Old and New World contexts. He noted that American civilizations had achieved metallurgical sophistication seemingly inconsistent with their apparent isolation from Old World technological traditions. The working of platinum by Andean cultures, the production of superior bronze alloys by various American groups, and the sophisticated gold working techniques found throughout the Americas suggested access to advanced technical knowledge that could be explained by Atlantean cultural transmission. Donnelly's mythological parallels, flood narratives, creation stories, and cosmological concepts found across multiple cultures worldwide, formed another major pillar of his argument. He argued that the widespread distribution of similar mythological themes could not be explained by coincidence or independent development alone, but rather suggested common origins in actual historical events. The flood narratives found in Mesopotamian, Hebrew, Greek, Hindu, and American traditions particularly supported his arguments about a global catastrophe that had destroyed an advanced antediluvian civilization. The influence of Donnelly's work extended far beyond academic circles into popular culture and alternative historical movements. Atlantis, the antediluvian world, became a bestseller that went through numerous editions and translations, introducing Atlantean theories to audiences worldwide. His systematic approach and extensive documentation gave his arguments an aura of scientific respectability that attracted readers who might have dismissed more speculative treatments of the subject. His work established Atlantis as a legitimate topic for investigation rather than mere fantasy, inspiring generations of researchers to continue searching for evidence of the lost continent. The Theosophical movement that emerged during the late 19th century provided another crucial channel for Atlantean ideas, integrating Plato's account into elaborate metaphysical systems, claiming to preserve ancient wisdom traditions. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the enigmatic Russian occultist who founded modern theosophy, encountered Donnelly's work during the formative period of her movement and incorporated many of his ideas into her comprehensive worldview. Her massive work, The Secret Doctrine, published in 1888, presented Atlantis as one stage in humanity's spiritual evolution, governed by advanced beings who had guided human development through successive epochs. Blavatsky's treatment of Atlantis differed significantly from Donnelly's historical approach, emphasizing metaphysical and spiritual dimensions rather than purely physical evidence. She claimed access to ancient records preserved in Tibetan monasteries containing detailed accounts of Atlantean civilization and its destruction. These records, which she called the stanzas of Jian, allegedly described the rise and fall of successive human races, with the Atlanteans representing the fourth root race in humanity's evolutionary development. According to her account, the Atlanteans had possessed psychic abilities and magical powers exceeding those of modern humans, but they had misused these gifts for selfish purposes, leading ultimately to their destruction. The theosophical interpretation of Atlantean chronology extended far beyond Plato's account, placing the civilization within a vast cosmological framework spanning millions of years. Blavatsky argued that human evolution proceeded through 7 root races, each lasting hundreds of thousands of years and developing on different continents. The Atlantean root race had inhabited a continent in the Atlantic Ocean for approximately 1 million years, achieving remarkable technological and spiritual development before succumbing to materialism and moral corruption. This extended time frame allowed theosophists to reconcile Atlantean civilization with emerging geological and evolutionary theories while maintaining its historical reality. Blavatsky's descriptions of Atlantean technology incorporated elements from contemporary scientific discoveries while adding mystical dimensions appealing to occult audiences. She claimed the Atlanteans had developed flying machines powered by a life force energy she called vril, constructed buildings from materials modern science could not replicate, and possessed weapons that could destroy entire armies through psychic rather than physical means. These achievements supposedly resulted from the Atlanteans' superior understanding of natural forces and their ability to manipulate matter through mental concentration and spiritual discipline. Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophical teachings presented perhaps the most comprehensively developed occult interpretation of Atlantean civilization, integrating detailed descriptions of ancient spiritual practices with elaborate theories about human evolution across multiple incarnations. Born in Austria in 1861, Steiner had initially pursued conventional academic studies in mathematics and natural science before experiencing what he described as direct spiritual perceptions, revealing the hidden dimensions of human history. His background in Goethe's scientific works and German idealist philosophy provided the intellectual framework for interpreting these spiritual insights, while his extensive knowledge of contemporary archaeological and ethnographic research lent apparent scientific credibility to his esoteric revelations. According to Steiner's investigations, Atlantean civilization had flourished on a continent in the Atlantic Ocean, approximately 15,000 to 10,000 years ago, during a period when human consciousness operated according to fundamentally different principles than those governing modern awareness. The Atlanteans possessed what Steiner termed picture consciousness, a form of awareness that combined direct spiritual perception with practical knowledge of natural forces. Unlike modern humans, who experienced clear distinctions between subjective thoughts and objective external reality, Atlanteans lived in a state of consciousness where spiritual beings and natural phenomena interpenetrated seamlessly, allowing them to manipulate physical matter through concentrated mental effort and communion with elemental forces. It is an image unlike any other, a world where the boundary between mind and nature was not a wall, but a membrane, permeable in both directions. The Atlantean root race, as Steiner described it, represented the fourth stage in humanity's spiritual evolution, preceded by the Polarian, Hyperborean, and Lemurian root races, each developing different aspects of human potential under the guidance of advanced spiritual hierarchies. The Atlanteans inherited from their Lemurian predecessors the ability to work directly with life forces, but they developed this capacity in new directions, emphasizing technological applications and social organization. Their civilization achieved remarkable material prosperity through methods combining spiritual insight with practical engineering, technologies that operated through principles entirely unknown to modern science. Steiner's descriptions of Atlantean technology emphasized the manipulation of life forces rather than mechanical principles. Atlantean vehicles moved through the air by harnessing what Steiner called seed forces, the same energies governing plant growth and organic development. These aerial machines resembled living organisms more than mechanical constructions, their surfaces breathing and pulsating as they drew power from cosmic currents that Atlantean pilots could perceive and direct through trained spiritual faculties. The vehicles required no external fuel, because their operators had learned to tap directly into the etheric forces sustaining all biological processes. The architectural achievements of Atlantean civilization reflected similar principles, with buildings constructed from materials that responded to human thought and emotion. Atlantean architects worked with substances that could be shaped through mental concentration, creating structures that adapted to their inhabitants' needs while maintaining harmony with natural environmental rhythms. The great temples and palaces described in Steiner's accounts featured walls that glowed from within, rooms that expanded or contracted according to the activities performed within them, and decorative elements that shifted their patterns in response to the spiritual development of those who observed them. A living architecture, breathing and aware. The educational system that governed Atlantean society focused primarily on developing each individual's capacity for direct spiritual perception and conscious collaboration with supernatural beings. Young Atlanteans learned to communicate with elemental spirits governing natural processes, gaining practical knowledge about agriculture, metallurgy, and engineering through direct instruction from entities that understood these subjects from within. The most advanced students progressed to working with higher spiritual beings who revealed the cosmic laws governing planetary evolution and humanity's role within the larger spiritual hierarchy guiding universal development. Steiner emphasized that Atlantean civilization was organized according to strict spiritual hierarchies, reflecting each individual's level of spiritual development and capacity for responsible use of supernatural powers. The ruling class consisted of initiates maintaining direct communication with the spiritual beings who had originally guided human evolution, while the general population was divided into groups according to their particular gifts and practical capabilities. This social organization prevented the misuse of spiritual powers while ensuring that each person contributed to civilization's development according to their unique talents and evolutionary needs. The decline of Atlantean civilization began when certain groups attempted to use their spiritual abilities for personal gain, rather than service to the greater evolutionary plan. These individuals developed techniques for manipulating spiritual forces in ways that violated cosmic law and disrupted the natural harmony between human consciousness and elemental beings. Their practices gradually corrupted the entire civilization, leading to conflicts between different Atlantean groups and ultimately triggering the catastrophic events that destroyed the continent and forced surviving populations to migrate to other regions of the Earth. The destruction of Atlantis occurred through a combination of natural catastrophes and spiritual causes, as the misuse of life forces destabilized the etheric foundations supporting the continent's physical existence. Steiner described massive floods and volcanic eruptions resulting from the disruption of natural elemental forces, but he emphasized that these physical events were symptoms of deeper spiritual imbalances caused by human moral failures. The catastrophe served as a cosmic correction that eliminated a civilization incompatible with continued spiritual evolution, while preserving the knowledge and abilities needed for humanity's future development. The migration of Atlantean survivors to various regions of the Earth established the foundation for all subsequent human civilizations, each preserving different aspects of original Atlantean wisdom, while adapting to new geographical and cultural conditions. Steiner traced the development of Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Indian, and European cultures to specific Atlantean migration streams, arguing that the distinctive characteristics of each civilization reflected the particular spiritual gifts and evolutionary tasks of the Atlantean groups that had founded them. Edgar Cayce's psychic readings provided another comprehensive source of information about Atlantean civilization, based on what he claimed was direct access to the Akashic Records, a spiritual repository containing complete information about all events in human history. Known as the Sleeping Prophet because he delivered his readings while in a trance state, Cayce produced over 14,000 documented readings between 1901 and 1944, of which approximately 700 dealt specifically with Atlantis and its influence on human development. Unlike Steiner's systematic philosophical approach, Cayce's information emerged through individual readings for specific clients seeking to understand their past incarnations and karmic relationships. Each reading arrived like a message from an extraordinary depth, unhurried, specific, and deeply strange. According to Cayce's readings, Atlantean civilization had existed in 3 distinct periods spanning approximately 200,000 years, with the final destruction occurring around 10,000 BC, in accordance with Plato's general time frame. The readings described a technologically advanced society that had developed sophisticated applications of crystal technology, atomic energy, and what Cayce termed electrical forces operating according to principles unknown to modern science. These technologies enabled the Atlanteans to achieve remarkable material prosperity and social organization, but they also created the potential for destructive applications that ultimately led to the civilization's downfall. The crystal technology that featured so prominently in Cayce's Atlantean readings involved the use of specially prepared quartz crystals to focus and amplify various forms of energy for practical applications. The Great Crystal, located in the Atlantean capital, served as the primary power source for the entire civilization, converting solar radiation and cosmic forces into usable energy, distributed through a network of smaller crystals positioned throughout the continent. These crystals powered flying vehicles, illuminated cities, facilitated long-distance communication, and provided the energy needed for massive construction projects and industrial operations. Casey described the Atlantean understanding of crystal technology as based on recognition that crystalline structures could serve as interfaces between physical matter and spiritual forces. Trained operators known as keepers of the crystal learn to attune their consciousness to specific crystal frequencies, enabling them to direct energy flows with precision and power exceeding modern technological capabilities. The crystals responded to human thought and intention, but they required operators possessing both technical knowledge and spiritual discipline to prevent dangerous resonances that could produce explosions or other catastrophic effects. The readings emphasized that Atlantean crystal technology was inseparably connected to the spiritual development of those who operated it, with the most powerful applications requiring operators who had achieved advanced states of consciousness through years of training and initiation. The technology worked through principles of sympathetic resonance between human consciousness and crystalline structures, enabling trained individuals to manipulate physical forces through mental concentration and spiritual alignment with cosmic energies. This integration of spiritual and technological development meant that the decline of Atlantean moral standards directly affected the stability and safety of their technological systems, a warning that seems to echo across the centuries with particular weight. Casey's descriptions of Atlantean society revealed a civilization divided between the children of the Law of One, who sought to use Atlantean abilities for service to others and alignment with divine will, and the sons of Belial, who pursued material power and personal gratification through the exploitation of both technology and other human beings. The conflict between these groups intensified over thousands of years, ultimately producing wars employing destructive technologies capable of devastating entire regions. The reincarnation cycles described in Casey's readings revealed how many individuals who had lived in Atlantis were returning to incarnation during the 20th century, bringing with them both positive abilities and negative karma accumulated during their Atlantean lifetimes. These returning Atlanteans often displayed unusual talents in areas related to their previous specializations: crystal healing, energy work, or advanced technological intuition. But they also carried karmic burdens related to the misuse of power during Atlantis' decline. The prophecies contained within Casey's Atlantean readings predicted that portions of the lost continent would begin rising from the ocean floor during the latter part of the 20th century, starting with areas near the Bahamas and the Caribbean. These geological changes would allegedly be accompanied by the rediscovery of Atlantean technologies, particularly crystal applications and energy systems that could provide solutions to modern environmental and social problems. The reading suggested that the return of Atlantean knowledge would coincide with humanity's spiritual awakening and the emergence of a new civilization based on principles of cooperation and service rather than competition and exploitation. The Rosicrucian tradition's incorporation of Atlantean wisdom drew upon both historical research and claimed mystical revelations to position the lost continent as a crucial source of the ancient knowledge that Rosicrucian initiates sought to preserve and transmit. The modern Rosicrucian movement, which emerged during the early 17th century through the publication of the Fama Fraternitatis and Confessio Fraternitatis, claimed descent from an ancient brotherhood preserving esoteric wisdom from antediluvian civilizations. While these founding documents did not explicitly mention Atlantis, later Rosicrucian writers developed elaborate connections between their tradition and Atlantean mystery schools. Max Heindel, founder of the Rosicrucian Fellowship in the early 20th century, presented detailed accounts of Atlantean civilization based on what he claimed were direct spiritual investigations, conducted under the guidance of advanced initiates known as elder brothers. According to Heindel's teachings, the Atlanteans had developed their spiritual and technological capabilities under the direct instruction of divine beings who had incarnated among humanity to guide its evolution. These divine teachers established mystery schools where selected individuals received training in the manipulation of life forces and the principles governing spiritual development. The Rosicrucian interpretation of Atlantean mystery schools emphasized their role as repositories of complete knowledge about human potential and cosmic law. These institutions allegedly preserved understanding of subjects ranging from practical healing arts to advanced metaphysical principles governing planetary evolution and spiritual hierarchy. The curriculum included training in alchemy, astrology, sacred geometry, and various forms of energy manipulation that enabled graduates to work consciously with the forces governing natural processes and human development. Heindel's descriptions of Atlantean alchemy differed significantly from later medieval European traditions, emphasizing the transformation of consciousness rather than the transmutation of base metals into gold. Atlantean alchemists worked directly with life forces to accelerate spiritual evolution and develop superhuman capabilities, using techniques combining meditation, ritual practice, and the manipulation of subtle energies. Their laboratories contained crystalline apparatus that focused cosmic forces for various transformative purposes, including the preparation of elixirs that enhanced psychic abilities and extended human lifespan far beyond normal limits. The preservation of Atlantean wisdom through the catastrophic destruction of the continent required elaborate preparations by the mystery school initiates who foresaw the coming disaster. According to Rosicrucian accounts, these advanced beings established refuge centers in various parts of the world, where selected groups could continue their training and maintain the essential knowledge needed for humanity's future development. The most important of these refuge centers were located in Egypt, where the mystery schools of Memphis and Heliopolis preserved Atlantean wisdom in modified forms, adapted to post-catastrophe conditions. The Hermetic tradition and the Golden Dawn's interpretation of Atlantis as a center of magical learning drew upon Renaissance alchemical traditions while incorporating modern archaeological discoveries and comparative religious studies. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in London in 1888, claimed to possess ancient manuscripts revealing the complete system of magical training originally developed in Atlantean temples. These documents, allegedly translated from ancient Egyptian sources, described elaborate initiation procedures and magical techniques enabling practitioners to develop the same supernatural abilities that had characterized Atlantean civilization at its height. Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers, one of the Golden Dawn's founding members, developed detailed correspondences between Atlantean magical practices and the Kabbalistic system, forming the theoretical foundation of Golden Dawn teachings. According to Mathers' interpretation, the Tree of Life diagram represented a map of consciousness that Atlantean initiates had used to navigate different levels of spiritual reality and develop specific magical capabilities. Each sephira on the tree corresponded to particular aspects of Atlantean training, while the paths between them represented the stages of initiation through which students progressed as they mastered increasingly advanced techniques. The Golden Dawn's magical curriculum allegedly reconstructed the complete training system originally used in Atlantean mystery schools, beginning with basic exercises in concentration and visualization, and progressing through increasingly complex operations involving elemental forces, planetary influences, and direct communication with spiritual beings. Advanced practitioners learned to project their consciousness to distant locations, manipulate physical matter through mental concentration, and access information directly from cosmic sources rather than through normal sensory channels. These techniques required years of discipline, practice, and moral purification to prevent the psychological dangers that could result from premature exposure to supernatural forces. The ritual practices developed within the Golden Dawn tradition incorporated elaborate ceremonial procedures said to recreate the sacred environments of Atlantean temples. These rituals employed specific combinations of colors, sounds, scents, and geometric patterns to create psychic conditions conducive to magical operations and spiritual transformation. The temple rooms were decorated with Egyptian and other ancient symbols, allegedly preserving Atlantean sacred geometry, while the ritual implements were designed according to specifications claimed to have been used in the original mystery schools. Aleister Crowley's interpretation of Atlantean themes, developed during his involvement with the Golden Dawn and later through his own magical investigations, emphasized the recovery of pre-Christian spiritual practices suppressed by organized religion. Crowley claimed to have accessed memories of his own Atlantean incarnations through magical techniques, revealing his previous identity as an advanced initiate who had participated in the final struggles between opposing factions within Atlantean society. These recovered memories allegedly provided him with direct knowledge of magical techniques and spiritual principles lost since Atlantis' destruction. The influence of Atlantean themes on modern occult movements extended far beyond specific organizations to encompass broader cultural movements seeking alternatives to conventional religious and scientific worldviews. The New Age movement that emerged during the 1960s drew heavily upon theosophical, anthroposophical, and other esoteric interpretations of Atlantis, presenting the lost continent as a model for the spiritually advanced civilization that humanity could achieve through consciousness expansion and holistic living. This popularization of Atlantean themes contributed to widespread interest in crystal healing, channeling, and other practices allegedly derived from Atlantean wisdom traditions. The transformation of Atlantis from romantic speculation to systematic archaeological inquiry began with Heinrich Schliemann's revolutionary excavations at Troy in the 1870s, which demonstrated that locations described in ancient literature could correspond to actual archaeological sites buried beneath centuries of accumulated debris. Schliemann's discovery of multiple city layers at Hisarlik fundamentally challenged the prevailing academic assumption that ancient epics represented pure mythology rather than historical memory. When his excavations revealed massive stone fortifications, elaborate palaces, and evidence of violent destruction matching Homer's descriptions, scholars worldwide began reconsidering their dismissive attitudes toward other ancient accounts previously relegated to the realm of fantasy. The implications of Schliemann's methodology extended far beyond Homeric archaeology to encompass all ancient sources describing lost civilizations and vanished cities. His systematic approach involved careful analysis of textual descriptions, geographical reasoning based on ancient sources, and persistent excavation despite academic skepticism and local obstacles. The discovery of gold masks, sophisticated pottery, and advanced metallurgical techniques at Mycenae provided additional confirmation that Bronze Age civilizations had achieved remarkable sophistication centuries before classical Greek culture emerged. These findings established precedents for taking ancient accounts seriously as potential guides to archaeological discovery, encouraging researchers to apply similar methodological approaches to other mysterious locations mentioned in classical literature. Schliemann's success inspired a generation of archaeologists to pursue systematic investigations of sites mentioned in ancient sources that had previously been dismissed as mythological. The excavation techniques he developed, emphasizing careful stratigraphic recording and preservation of architectural remains, became standard practices, enabling archaeologists to reconstruct detailed pictures of ancient civilizations from fragmentary physical evidence. His willingness to challenge academic orthodoxy and pursue investigations based on ancient textual sources demonstrated that conventional scholarly wisdom could be overturned by persistent empirical investigation, guided by careful analysis of primary sources. The discovery of advanced Bronze Age civilizations in the Aegean region provided crucial context for understanding how sophisticated cultures could develop and disappear within relatively short periods, leaving only scattered traces for later archaeologists to discover. The palace complexes at Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos revealed administrative systems, artistic achievements, and technological capabilities surpassing what scholars had previously attributed to prehistoric European cultures. Linear B tablets found at these sites documented complex bureaucratic procedures, extensive trade networks, and social organizations, demonstrating the existence of advanced literate civilizations during periods when historical records had suggested only primitive tribal societies existed. Sir Arthur Evans's excavations at Knossos, beginning in 1900, revealed an even more remarkable prehistoric civilization, bearing striking resemblances to Plato's descriptions of Atlantean society and architecture. The Minoan Palace complex that Evans uncovered featured elaborate hydraulic systems, sophisticated drainage networks, and multi-story buildings decorated with vibrant frescoes depicting an advanced maritime culture. The complex layout included ceremonial courtyards, residential quarters, storage facilities, and workshop areas arranged according to carefully planned architectural principles that maximized both functionality and aesthetic appeal. The discovery of extensive bathing facilities with running water, elaborate throne rooms, and sophisticated ventilation systems demonstrated technological capabilities matching many aspects of Plato's Atlantean descriptions. The hydraulic engineering that sustained Minoan civilization particularly impressed Evans and his team. Evidence of advanced water management systems supplied the palace complex and surrounding settlements through carefully engineered aqueducts and distribution networks. The Minoans had developed techniques for moving water across considerable distances using gravity-fed systems, underground conduits, and settling basins that removed sediment and maintained water quality. Their drainage systems incorporated sophisticated understanding of hydraulic principles, including parabolic curves and settling chambers that prevented blockages and maintained consistent flow rates during varying seasonal conditions. The artistic achievements preserved in Minoan frescoes revealed a maritime civilization, achieving remarkable prosperity through extensive trade networks spanning the entire Mediterranean region. The famous dolphin frescoes, bull leaping scenes, and depictions of elaborate court ceremonies suggested a culture combining advanced artistic sensibilities with sophisticated social organization. The technical quality of Minoan pottery, metalwork, and textile production demonstrated mastery of complex manufacturing processes requiring specialized knowledge and organized workshop systems. Evans's interpretation of Minoan civilization emphasized its role as a major maritime power that had dominated Mediterranean trade routes through superior naval technology and strategic geographic positioning. The absence of massive fortifications at Minoan sites suggested a civilization confident in its naval supremacy and secure in its island location, characteristics matching Plato's descriptions of Atlantean military organization and strategic advantages. The extensive storage facilities found throughout Minoan palaces indicated centralized economic systems capable of accumulating and redistributing vast quantities of agricultural products and manufactured goods, supporting the large populations and specialized occupations that characterized advanced civilizations. The mysterious collapse of Minoan civilization around 1450 BC provided another parallel to Plato's account of Atlantean destruction, as archaeological evidence suggested that this sophisticated culture had disappeared suddenly after centuries of prosperity and expansion. The palace at Knossos showed evidence of violent destruction, with fire damage and abandonment indicating rapid collapse rather than gradual decline. The absence of Minoan influence in subsequent Aegean cultures suggested that their knowledge and techniques had been largely lost rather than transmitted to successor civilizations, paralleling the complete disappearance that Plato attributed to Atlantis. Spyridon Marinatus' systematic investigation of the connection between Minoan collapse and volcanic activity at Thera established the first scientifically rigorous framework for understanding how natural catastrophes could destroy advanced civilizations within the timeframes described in ancient sources. Beginning his research in the 1930s and continuing through extensive excavations in the 1960s, Marinato assembled geological, archaeological, and textual evidence demonstrating how massive volcanic eruptions could produce the rapid destruction and cultural amnesia that characterized accounts of lost civilizations. The volcanic eruption at Thera, around 1600 BC, represented one of the most powerful explosive events in recorded human history, with effects extending throughout the eastern Mediterranean and beyond. Geological studies revealed that the eruption had ejected approximately 30 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere, creating a caldera collapse that fundamentally altered the island's geography and generated massive tsunamis devastating coastal settlements throughout the Aegean region. Marinatos' excavations at Akrotiri on Thera revealed a remarkably preserved Bronze Age settlement buried under volcanic ash, creating conditions similar to those at Pompeii that allowed extraordinary preservation of organic materials and architectural details. The multi-story buildings uncovered at Akrotiri featured sophisticated drainage systems, elaborate frescoes, and advanced construction techniques demonstrating the technological capabilities of Aegean Bronze Age civilizations. The absence of human remains and valuable objects suggested that inhabitants had received sufficient warning to evacuate before the final catastrophic eruption, indicating that the volcanic activity had occurred in stages over an extended period, as though the mountain had given those who would listen a chance to escape. The cultural connections between Akrotiri and Minoan Crete, revealed through artistic styles, pottery types, and architectural techniques, demonstrated that Thera had been integrated into the broader Minoan cultural sphere. The frescoes found at Akrotiri included scenes of maritime activities, religious ceremonies, and daily life paralleling those found in Minoan palaces, suggesting shared cultural traditions and possibly direct political connections. Marinatos' theoretical framework connecting the Thera eruption to Plato's Atlantis account focused on the possibility that Egyptian records had preserved memories of the catastrophic destruction of Aegean civilizations, subsequently transmitted to Greek sources through the channels Plato described. The timing of the Thera eruption coincided with Egyptian historical records mentioning invasions by sea peoples and other disruptions that could have resulted from displacement of Aegean populations by volcanic catastrophe. The scale of destruction caused by the eruption and subsequent tsunamis could have produced the kind of cultural trauma that would be preserved in oral traditions and eventually recorded in written sources. The geographical adjustments that Marinatos proposed to reconcile Plato's account with the Aegean archaeology involved accommodating distortions that commonly occur in oral historical traditions. He argued that the essential elements of Plato's narrative, an advanced island civilization destroyed by natural catastrophe, matched the archaeological evidence from the Aegean Bronze Age, while specific details about size and chronology could be explained by the natural transformations that occur as information passes through generations. Modern underwater archaeology has revolutionized the search for physical evidence of lost civilizations by enabling systematic investigation of submerged landscapes that could preserve remains of ancient settlements and cultural activities. The development of scuba diving technology, remote sensing equipment, and submersible vehicles has opened vast areas of the ocean floor to archaeological investigation, revealing extensive evidence of human occupation in areas now underwater due to post-glacial sea level changes and geological subsidence. The Mediterranean seafloor has yielded numerous discoveries demonstrating the extent of ancient maritime activities and coastal settlements subsequently submerged by rising sea levels or seismic events. Underwater surveys off the coasts of Greece, Turkey, and the Levant have revealed ancient harbors, residential areas, and industrial installations abandoned when sea levels rose or land areas subsided. These discoveries provide concrete evidence that substantial human settlements existed in areas now underwater, supporting the possibility that larger civilizations could have been submerged by similar processes. The systematic mapping of the Mediterranean seafloor using side-scan sonar, magnetometry, and other remote sensing techniques has revealed complex underwater topographies, including submerged islands, underwater ridges, and deep basins that could have supported substantial human populations during periods of lower sea level. The discovery of freshwater springs on the ocean floor indicates that areas now underwater once supported the water resources necessary for large settlements and agricultural activities. Archaeological investigations in the Atlantic Ocean have focused primarily on areas where geological evidence suggests the existence of former land bridges or submerged islands that could have supported human occupation. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge System contains numerous underwater mountains and plateaus that were once above sea level, providing potential locations for ancient settlements that could have been submerged by geological processes or sea level changes. Deep sea exploration of these areas has revealed geological formations and sediment patterns indicating significant environmental changes within timeframes that could coincide with human occupation. The Azores Plateau represents one of the most extensively investigated Atlantic regions where geological evidence suggests former land areas that could have supported substantial human populations. Bathymetric surveys have revealed extensive shallow areas that were above sea level during glacial periods, while sediment cores contain evidence of terrestrial vegetation and freshwater deposits indicating former subaerial exposure. These geological conditions could have supported the kind of large island civilization that Plato described, though systematic archaeological investigation of these underwater areas remains technically challenging and expensive. Sonar mapping of the Caribbean region has revealed extensive submerged landscapes exposed during periods of lower sea level, including areas that could have supported substantial human settlements. The Bahama Banks contain numerous underwater features suggesting former land areas, while the Caribbean basin includes submerged ridges and plateaus that could have formed island chains during glacial periods. The Black Sea has become a focus of underwater archaeological investigation, following discoveries demonstrating how rapidly rising sea levels can submerge coastal settlements while preserving archaeological materials under anaerobic conditions. The flooding of the Black Sea basin around 7,000 years ago created conditions preserving organic materials and architectural remains that would have been destroyed in terrestrial environments. These discoveries provide concrete examples of how major environmental changes can rapidly submerge human settlements while preserving archaeological evidence under specific geological conditions. The discovery of rapid environmental changes preserved in ice cores, sediment layers, and geological formations has fundamentally transformed our understanding of how quickly catastrophic events can reshape entire landscapes and destroy advanced civilizations. The Younger Dryas period, spanning from approximately 12,900 to 11,700 years ago, represents one of the most dramatic and well-documented examples of sudden climate change in human history, occurring precisely within the time frame that ancient traditions associate with great floods and the destruction of antediluvian civilizations. This 1,000-year period of intense cold interrupted the gradual warming that had been melting the massive ice sheets covering northern Europe and North America, creating conditions that would have devastated any advanced societies developed during the preceding warmer intervals. The onset of the Younger Dryas occurred with startling rapidity, as evidenced by ice core data from Greenland showing temperatures dropping by as much as 10 degrees Celsius within a single decade. This dramatic cooling was accompanied by equally sudden changes in precipitation patterns, with some regions experiencing severe droughts while others faced unprecedented flooding, as glacial melt patterns shifted dramatically. The speed of these changes would have given human populations little time to adapt their agricultural systems, urban infrastructure, or social organizations to the new environmental conditions, potentially causing the collapse of any sophisticated civilizations that had emerged during the warmer Alarud period preceding the Younger Dryas. The mechanism triggering this sudden climate reversal appears to have involved the disruption of ocean circulation patterns, particularly the thermohaline circulation system, transporting warm water northward through the Atlantic Ocean. The massive influx of fresh water from melting ice sheets diluted the salinity of North Atlantic waters, preventing the normal sinking of dense cold water that drives the global circulation system. This disruption effectively shut down the oceanic conveyor belt that moderates climate throughout the North Atlantic region, plunging Europe and eastern North America into conditions resembling those of the Little Ice Age, but occurring far more rapidly and severely. Recent research has identified potential triggers for this circulation collapse in the form of catastrophic drainage events from glacial lakes that had formed along the margins of retreating ice sheets. Lake Agassiz, a massive glacial lake covering much of central Canada, contained more fresh water than all of the current Great Lakes combined. Geological evidence suggests this enormous body experienced periodic catastrophic drainage events when ice dams failed or drainage channels shifted, releasing volumes of water equivalent to modern-day floods occurring over periods of months rather than the gradual drainage that characterizes normal lake systems. The most significant of these drainage events appears to have occurred at the beginning of the Younger Dryas, when Lake Agassiz shifted its drainage from southward flow through the Mississippi River system to eastward flow through the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River directly into the North Atlantic. This redirection suddenly introduced vast quantities of fresh water into the precise oceanic region where dense, salty water normally sinks to drive global circulation patterns. The timing of this drainage event correlates precisely with the onset of Younger Dryas cooling, providing a plausible mechanism for the rapid climate change that characterizes this period. The impact of Younger Dryas conditions on human populations would have been catastrophic for any groups that had developed sophisticated agricultural systems or large settled communities during the preceding warmer period. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe and the Middle East show significant cultural disruptions and population declines coinciding with the onset of colder conditions. The Natufian culture of the Levant, which had developed some of the earliest known permanent settlements and proto-agricultural practices, experienced significant changes in settlement patterns and subsistence strategies appearing to correlate with Younger Dryas environmental stress. The end of the Younger Dryas was equally dramatic, with temperatures rising by as much as 7 degrees Celsius within a few decades as oceanic circulation patterns resumed their normal operation. This rapid warming was accompanied by massive melting of ice sheets and glaciers, causing sea levels to rise by approximately 120 meters over several millennia. The rate of sea level rise was not constant, however, with periods of particularly rapid change occurring when large ice sheets collapsed or when glacial lakes drained suddenly into the oceans. These pulses of rapid sea level rise would have inundated coastal areas where human populations were likely concentrated, potentially destroying archaeological evidence of early civilizations. The meltwater pulse events accompanying deglaciation represent some of the most rapid sea level changes in geological history, with rates of rise reaching several meters per century during peak melting periods. Meltwater pulse 1A, which occurred around 14,600 years ago, raised global sea levels by approximately 20 meters over a period of 400 to 500 years. Meltwater pulse 1B, around 11,400 years ago, contributed another 7 to 15 meters of sea level rise. These events would have been catastrophic for coastal populations, submerging vast areas of continental shelf that had been exposed during glacial periods and forcing massive population migrations inland. The continental shelves exposed during glacial maximum conditions provided extensive habitable land areas now underwater, potentially concealing evidence of early human civilizations that developed during periods of lower sea level. The Doggerland region between Britain and continental Europe covered an area larger than modern-day Britain and provided a land bridge connecting these regions until approximately 6,500 years ago. Archaeological investigations of this submerged landscape have revealed evidence of human occupation, including tools, hearths, and organic remains, demonstrating that substantial populations once lived in areas now beneath the North Sea. The Persian Gulf was almost entirely dry land during glacial maximum conditions, providing a river valley environment that could have supported large agricultural populations before being flooded by rising seas. The Black Sea Deluge hypothesis, developed through the research of William Ryan and Walter Pittman, provides a specific example of how rapid flooding events could have destroyed advanced civilizations while creating the cultural memories appearing in flood narratives worldwide. Their investigation of Black Sea sediments revealed evidence for a catastrophic flooding event around 7,600 years ago, when rising Mediterranean waters breached the Bosphorus barrier and flooded the Black Sea basin with tremendous force and speed. The flooding raised Black Sea levels by more than 100 meters, inundating approximately 100,000 square kilometers of previously habitable land. The scale and speed of the Black Sea flooding would have been unprecedented in human experience, with water levels rising at rates of several centimeters per day over a period of months to years. This flooding would have displaced hundreds of thousands of people who had settled in the fertile river valleys and coastal plains surrounding the former Black Sea Lake, forcing massive migrations that could have spread flood narratives throughout the ancient world. The archaeological evidence from the region shows significant cultural disruptions and population movements coinciding with the timing of the flooding event. The geological mechanism causing the Black Sea Deluge involved the gradual rise of global sea levels following the end of the last ice age which eventually brought Mediterranean waters to the level of the Bosphorus sill that had previously separated the Black Sea from the world ocean system. Once this barrier was breached, the hydraulic pressure created by the difference in water levels between the Mediterranean and Black Sea basins would have caused massive erosion of the barrier, creating a waterfall effect capable of moving volumes of water equivalent to 200 times the flow of Niagara Falls. The sediment cores extracted from the Black Sea floor preserve detailed records of this flooding event, including layers of Mediterranean marine organisms that suddenly appear in what had previously been a freshwater lake environment. The cultural impact of the Black Sea deluge extended far beyond the immediate region through the migrations of displaced populations who carried flood narratives to new territories throughout Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The timing of this event coincides with the spread of agricultural populations from the Near East into Europe, suggesting that flood refugees may have contributed to the Neolithic expansion transforming European societies. The linguistic and genetic evidence for population movements during this period supports the hypothesis that major environmental catastrophes played crucial roles in shaping human cultural development and geographic distribution. Plate tectonic processes provide additional mechanisms for rapid geological changes that could destroy island civilizations within the time frames described in ancient sources. The Mediterranean region remains geologically active, with ongoing processes of seafloor spreading, subduction, and strike-slip faulting capable of producing sudden vertical movements of the Earth's crust. The Hellenic arc system represents one of the most seismically active regions in the world, with historical records documenting numerous earthquakes causing significant changes in coastal geography and island configurations. The earthquake that destroyed much of Crete in 365 AD was accompanied by vertical crustal movements that raised some coastal areas by several meters, while submerging others, demonstrating how rapidly tectonic processes can alter regional geography. Similar events occurring in prehistoric periods could have caused the submergence of island civilizations without leaving clear historical records. Volcanic activity in the Mediterranean provides another mechanism for rapid destruction, as demonstrated by the well-documented cases of Pompeii and Herculaneum. The explosive eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD preserved detailed snapshots of Roman urban life, while simultaneously demonstrating how quickly volcanic events can obliterate entire cities and surrounding agricultural areas. The volcanic systems of the Aegean Sea have produced some of the largest explosive eruptions in human history, with the Minoan eruption of Thera representing only the most recent in a series of major volcanic events that have shaped the region's geography. Submarine volcanic activity poses particular risk to island civilizations because underwater eruptions can generate massive tsunamis devastating coastal areas without providing the warning signs that typically precede sub-aerial volcanic eruptions. The tsunami deposits found in coastal sediment sequences throughout the Mediterranean provide evidence for numerous prehistoric tsunami events that could have devastated coastal populations and island communities. These deposits consist of marine sediments transported inland by tsunami waves, creating distinctive geological signatures identifiable through careful stratigraphic analysis. The distribution and timing of these tsunami deposits suggests that major seismic events have repeatedly affected Mediterranean coastlines throughout human history. The preservation of archaeological evidence following rapid submergence depends on specific environmental conditions, preventing the destruction of organic materials and architectural remains. The anaerobic conditions developing in submerged sediments can preserve organic materials for thousands of years, while rapid burial by sediments can protect architectural remains from erosion and biological degradation. These preservation mechanisms have been demonstrated at underwater archaeological sites throughout the Mediterranean, where submerged settlements have maintained structural details and artifact assemblages, providing detailed information about ancient lifeways and technologies. The geological catastrophes shaping human memory during the post-glacial period left their mark not only in Mediterranean traditions, but across virtually every culture on Earth, creating a global tapestry of flood narratives, sunken lands, and lost golden ages, bearing striking similarities to Plato's Atlantis account. These widespread traditions suggest either common origins in actual historical events or fundamental patterns in human psychological responses to environmental catastrophe, with many cultures preserving remarkably specific details about advanced civilizations that disappeared beneath rising waters or were swallowed by the earth itself. Celtic traditions of lost lands beneath the waves represent some of Europe's most detailed and persistent memories of sunken civilizations, with the legends of Lyonesse and Wise providing particularly compelling parallels to Atlantean themes. The Cornish tradition of Lyonesse describes a fertile land that once connected Cornwall to the Isles of Scilly, supporting numerous towns and villages before being overwhelmed by the sea in a single catastrophic night. Medieval chroniclers recorded that this lost territory contained 140 parish churches and was governed from a great city that rivaled London in its magnificence, with elaborate palaces, markets, and harbors facilitating extensive maritime trade throughout the Atlantic and Mediterranean regions. The geographical details preserved in Lyonesse traditions correspond closely to bathymetric surveys of the area between Cornwall and the Scilly Isles, which reveal extensive shallow areas that were indeed above sea level during periods of lower ocean levels. The Seven Stones Reef, which creates dangerous navigation conditions in the area, represents the highest points of this submerged landscape. Sonar mapping has revealed what appear to be field boundaries, settlement patterns, and even possible architectural remains on the seafloor. Local fishermen have long reported recovering worked stones, pottery fragments, and other artifacts from their nets when fishing in these areas, suggesting that substantial human occupation once existed in regions now covered by dozens of meters of water. The destruction of Lyonesse was attributed to the moral corruption of its inhabitants, who had abandoned the virtues that had initially brought them prosperity and divine protection. The legends describe a society grown wealthy through maritime trade, but increasingly devoted to luxury, pride, and exploitation of the poor. The final catastrophe struck during a great harvest feast when the sea rose with supernatural speed and power, overwhelming the land's defensive barriers and drowning virtually the entire population, except for a single survivor who escaped on horseback, racing ahead of the advancing waters to reach the safety of higher ground. The Breton legend of Wise presents even more detailed parallels to Plato's Atlantis, describing a magnificent city built below sea level and protected by massive dikes and sluice gates controlling the flow of ocean waters. The city was ruled by King Gradlon and his daughter Dahut, who had created a sophisticated hydraulic system allowing their capital to exist in harmony with the surrounding sea while maintaining the dry conditions necessary for urban life. The engineering achievements attributed to Wise included bronze gates opening and closing according to tidal cycles, underground channels carrying fresh water throughout the city, and elaborate drainage systems preventing flooding during storms. The architecture of Wise was described as surpassing anything found in contemporary European cities, with palaces constructed from white stone and decorated with gold and precious gems, creating brilliant reflections in the surrounding waters. The city's markets attracted merchants from throughout the known world, while its harbors accommodated fleets carrying Breton goods to distant lands and returning with exotic products filling the warehouses of the prosperous inhabitants. The moral framework governing Wyses initially emphasized justice, hospitality, and respect for the natural forces both threatening and sustaining the city. The rulers were expected to maintain the delicate balance between human needs and oceanic power, ensuring that the hydraulic system functioned properly while avoiding the hubris that could provoke divine retribution. The decline began when Princess Dahut became corrupted by luxury and began opening the protective gates to admit her lovers, regardless of the tidal conditions making such actions dangerous. The destruction of Wyes occurred when Dahut's reckless behavior finally triggered a catastrophic failure of the city's protective systems, allowing the full force of the Atlantic Ocean to pour through the open gates and overwhelm the drainage systems maintaining the city's existence. The flood struck with such speed and violence that most inhabitants had no opportunity to escape, with the entire city disappearing beneath the waves in a single night. King Gradlon managed to flee on horseback, but when he attempted to save his daughter, a divine voice commanded him to abandon her to the waves as punishment for her role in the catastrophe. The parallels between these Celtic traditions and Plato's Atlantis extend beyond general themes of advanced island civilizations destroyed by floods to include specific details about hydraulic engineering, moral corruption, and sudden destruction, suggesting either common historical origins or remarkably consistent patterns in how different cultures remembered and transmitted accounts of catastrophic environmental change. The emphasis on advanced engineering capabilities, particularly in water management systems, appears in both traditions despite their development in different geographical and cultural contexts, suggesting these elements may preserve genuine historical memories rather than purely mythological constructions. Hindu traditions preserve perhaps the most extensive and sophisticated accounts of sunken lands and cyclical civilizations, with the concept of Kumari Kandam representing a comprehensive framework for understanding how advanced cultures could develop and disappear according to cosmic cycles operating on vast temporal scales. Tamil literature describes Kumari Kandam as a massive continent extending southward from the Indian subcontinent into the Indian Ocean, supporting numerous kingdoms and cities before being gradually submerged by rising seas over periods spanning thousands of years. The traditions describe 3 successive Tamil academies, or sangams, that preserved literary and cultural knowledge through these environmental changes, each academy relocating to higher ground as sea levels continued to rise. The geographical extent attributed to Kumari Kandam encompasses areas that geological evidence suggests were indeed above sea level during glacial periods when ocean levels were 120 meters lower than present conditions. The continental shelf extending southward from Tamil Nadu and Sri Lanka includes extensive shallow areas that would have provided substantial land area during periods of lower sea level, potentially supporting the large populations and complex societies described in the traditions. Recent bathymetric surveys and geological investigations have revealed submerged river valleys, possible settlement sites, and other features that could correspond to the lost landscapes described in Tamil literature. The city of Dwarka, associated with the Hindu deity Krishna, provides another crucial example of Indian traditions about submerged civilizations that have attracted serious archaeological investigation. The Mahabharata and various Puranas describe Dwarka as a magnificent city built on an island in the Arabian Sea, featuring elaborate palaces, sophisticated harbor facilities, and advanced defensive systems. The city was said to have been constructed according to divine architectural principles, harmonizing human needs with cosmic forces. creating an urban environment, achieving perfect balance between material prosperity and spiritual development. Archaeological investigations off the coast of Gujarat have revealed submerged structures that some researchers interpret as possible remnants of the legendary city. Marine archaeological surveys have documented stone structures, pottery fragments, and other artifacts in underwater locations corresponding to traditional accounts of Dwarka's position, while carbon dating of organic materials associated with these structures has yielded dates ranging from several centuries to several millennia BC. The technical challenges of underwater excavation in this region have limited systematic investigation. The hydraulic engineering attributed to Dwarka in textual sources includes sophisticated harbor systems with artificial channels, protective barriers against storm surges, and drainage systems managing both tidal fluctuations and monsoon flooding. The destruction of Dwarka, according to Hindu tradition, occurred shortly after Krishna's departure from earthly existence, when the protective divine presence sustaining the city was withdrawn and natural forces were allowed to reclaim the artificial landscape. The submergence was described as gradual rather than catastrophic, with the seas advancing over the city's defenses and eventually covering the entire urban area, a pattern matching the processes that would have affected coastal settlements during periods of rising sea level. Pacific Island traditions of the lost continent of Mu, or Lemuria, represent another major category of global flood narratives, bearing significant similarities to Atlantean themes. Regardless of the specific claims of various modern investigators, Pacific Island cultures preserve extensive oral traditions about sunken lands and lost civilizations that appear to be indigenous developments rather than borrowed from external sources. Polynesian creation myths and migration narratives frequently reference large land masses that once existed in the Pacific Ocean, but were submerged by rising waters or destroyed by divine intervention, forcing ancestral populations to undertake the remarkable ocean voyages that eventually populated scattered island chains throughout the Pacific. The navigational knowledge preserved in Polynesian traditions includes detailed understanding of ocean currents, seasonal wind patterns, stellar positions, and other environmental indicators, enabling accurate long-distance voyaging without instrumental navigation aids. This sophisticated body of practical knowledge suggests that Pacific Island cultures had achieved remarkable maritime capabilities that could have supported the kind of extensive civilization described in traditions about Mu or other lost Pacific lands. The geological context of the Pacific Ocean includes numerous underwater plateaus, seamounts, and island chains that were more extensive during periods of lower sea level, providing potential physical foundations for the large land masses described in Pacific Island traditions. The Hawaiian Emperor Seamount Chain, the Ontong Java Plateau, and other underwater features represent substantial areas that could have supported human populations during glacial periods when sea levels were significantly lower than present conditions. The volcanic activity characterizing much of the Pacific region could also have created temporary land masses subsequently destroyed by continued volcanic activity, or submerged by rising sea levels. Native American traditions about advanced pre-flood civilizations provide crucial evidence for understanding how oral historical traditions can preserve detailed information about ancient events across many generations without written records. The Hopi creation stories describe previous worlds destroyed when inhabitants abandoned the spiritual principles that had initially brought them prosperity and divine protection, with each destruction followed by the emergence of a new world where survivors could begin again with renewed understanding. The third world in Hopi tradition was characterized by advanced technological capabilities, enabling large-scale construction projects, sophisticated agricultural systems, and extensive trade networks connecting distant regions through both overland and maritime routes. The inhabitants had developed flying vehicles, advanced weapons, and communication systems operating according to principles unknown to later civilizations. The corruption leading to the Third World's destruction involved the misuse of these advanced capabilities for warfare and personal aggrandizement rather than service to the greater good and harmony with natural law. The few survivors who maintained proper spiritual understanding were guided to safety by spiritual beings who helped them reach the fourth world where current humanity now exists. The Cherokee traditions preserve detailed accounts of the Nunahai, an advanced people who lived in sophisticated cities before the great changes that reshaped the landscape and forced most human populations to adopt simpler lifestyles adapted to new environmental conditions. These traditions describe elaborate underground cities, advanced agricultural techniques, and social organizations achieving perfect harmony between individual freedom and collective responsibility. The Nunahai eventually withdrew from direct interaction with ordinary human beings, though they continue to provide guidance and assistance during times of crisis or spiritual need. The Lakota traditions about the Star People and their advanced civilization before the Great Floods describe technological capabilities paralleling those attributed to Atlantis, including flying vehicles, advanced metallurgy, and architectural achievements surpassing later Native American accomplishments. These traditions emphasize the spiritual dimensions of ancient technologies, describing them as operating through conscious cooperation with natural forces rather than mechanical manipulation of physical materials. The global distribution of flood narratives and lost civilization traditions creates a pattern transcending individual cultural boundaries and suggesting common origins in shared human experiences of catastrophic environmental change. The specific details preserved in different traditions vary according to local geographical and cultural conditions, but the underlying themes, advanced civilizations destroyed by moral corruption and natural catastrophe, appear with remarkable consistency across cultures that had no apparent historical contact with each other. This global pattern provides crucial context for understanding Plato's Atlantis account as part of a worldwide tradition of remembering and transmitting knowledge about humanity's response to major environmental changes during the post-glacial period. The revolution in archaeological methodology that began in the late 20th century has fundamentally transformed our understanding of prehistoric human capabilities, revealing sophisticated civilizations that flourished thousands of years before the traditional emergence of complex societies in Mesopotamia and Egypt. These discoveries have provided crucial context for evaluating the historical plausibility of Plato's Atlantis narrative, demonstrating that advanced architectural, astronomical, and social achievements were indeed possible during the time frames associated with ancient flood traditions and lost civilization accounts. The excavation of Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, beginning with Klaus Schmidt's systematic investigations in the 1990s, revealed a monumental complex predating Stonehenge by approximately 6,000 years, and the earliest known urban centers by nearly 4,000 years. The site consists of at least 20 circular enclosures containing massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing up to 16 tons, and decorated with sophisticated relief carvings depicting animals, abstract symbols, and human figures. The precision of the stone cutting, the complexity of the architectural planning, and the coordination required for construction indicate that hunter-gatherer populations possessed organizational capabilities and technical knowledge far exceeding previous scholarly estimates. The astronomical alignments incorporated into Göbekli Tepe's design demonstrates sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics requiring centuries of systematic observation and mathematical analysis. The positioning of the stone circles corresponds to specific stellar configurations visible during the site's construction period, while the carved symbols include representations of constellations and celestial events suggesting detailed astronomical knowledge. This integration of practical construction techniques with advanced astronomical understanding parallels the technological sophistication attributed to Atlantean civilization in Plato's account. The social organization required to construct Göbekli Tepe challenges conventional assumptions about prehistoric social development, as the scale and complexity of the project would have required coordinated labor from multiple communities across an extended region. The site shows evidence of continuous use and modification over more than a millennium, indicating sustained institutional memory and cultural continuity, enabling successive generations to maintain and expand the complex according to long-term planning principles. The deliberate burial of the entire site around 8000 BC suggests organized decision-making processes capable of coordinating massive undertakings involving thousands of workers. The discovery of similar megalithic complexes throughout Turkey and the broader Middle East has revealed that Göbekli Tepe was part of a much larger cultural phenomenon, producing sophisticated monumental architecture across wide geographical areas during the early Neolithic period. Sites like Karahan Tepe, Nevalachori, and Çatalhöyük demonstrate that advanced construction techniques, artistic traditions, and social organizations were widespread rather than isolated achievements, suggesting the existence of cultural networks facilitating the transmission of knowledge and techniques across substantial distances. Poverty Point in Louisiana represents another crucial example of prehistoric sophistication, challenging conventional chronologies of cultural development in the Americas. The massive earthwork complex, constructed between 1700 and 1100 BC, consists of 6 concentric semicircular ridges spanning nearly a mile in diameter, along with numerous mounds and other features demonstrating sophisticated engineering capabilities and coordinated social organization. The geometric precision of the earthworks required advanced surveying techniques and mathematical understanding, while the scale of construction indicates the ability to mobilize and sustain large labor forces over extended periods. The artifacts recovered from Poverty Point include sophisticated stone tools, manufactured from materials obtained from sources hundreds of miles away, demonstrating extensive trade networks connecting diverse regional populations through systematic exchange relationships. The astronomical alignments incorporated into Poverty Point's design include sight lines corresponding to significant solar and lunar events, suggesting the builders possessed detailed knowledge of celestial cycles and their integration with seasonal and agricultural patterns. Corral in Peru, dating to approximately 3500 BC, provides evidence for complex urban civilization in South America, predating similar developments in Mesopotamia and Egypt by several centuries. The site contains monumental architecture, including stepped pyramids, circular plazas, and residential complexes demonstrating sophisticated urban planning and construction techniques. The architectural features include advanced seismic engineering, enabling structures to withstand earthquakes through flexible construction methods and careful foundation design, indicating detailed understanding of local geological conditions and engineering principles. The integration of satellite archaeology and remote sensing technologies has revolutionized the search for lost civilizations by enabling systematic investigation of vast areas impossible to survey through traditional ground-based methods. LiDAR technology has proven particularly effective for detecting archaeological features hidden beneath forest canopies, agricultural fields, and urban development, revealing previously unknown sites and settlement patterns across multiple continents. The application of LiDAR to Maya archaeology has revealed the existence of massive urban complexes completely invisible from ground level, including elaborate road systems, agricultural terraces, and defensive fortifications demonstrating the scale and sophistication of classic Maya civilization. The newly discovered settlements indicate that Maya population levels and territorial extent far exceeded previous estimates, while the infrastructure revealed through remote sensing demonstrates engineering capabilities rivaling those of contemporary Old World civilizations. Ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry have enabled archaeologists to map subsurface features without excavation, revealing buried structures, settlement patterns, and landscape modifications, providing detailed information about ancient sites before physical investigation begins. Satellite imagery analysis has identified potential archaeological sites in remote regions worldwide, including areas of the Sahara Desert, where ancient lake systems supported substantial human populations during more humid climatic periods. The psychological and cultural significance of Atlantis as an archetype transcends its potential historical reality to encompass fundamental human concerns about civilization, progress, and the relationship between technological advancement and moral development. The enduring appeal of the Atlantis narrative reflects deep-seated anxieties about the sustainability of complex societies and the potential for human achievements to be lost through environmental catastrophe, social collapse, or moral corruption. This archetypal dimension helps explain why Atlantis continues to capture popular imagination despite the lack of definitive archaeological evidence for its existence. The concept of lost paradise embedded within Atlantean traditions resonates with universal human experiences of loss, nostalgia, and the search for meaning in the face of mortality and impermanence. The image of an advanced civilization achieving remarkable prosperity and knowledge before being destroyed by its own hubris provides a powerful metaphor for contemporary concerns about environmental degradation, technological risks, and social inequality. This symbolic dimension enables Atlantis to serve as a mirror for examining current civilizational challenges and potential futures. The role of Atlantis in alternative historical movements reflects broader cultural tensions between official academic narratives and popular desires for more expansive and meaningful accounts of human origins and potential. The academic emphasis on gradual cultural evolution and the limitations of prehistoric societies conflicts with widespread intuitions that ancient peoples possessed capabilities and knowledge that have been underestimated or deliberately overlooked. Atlantis provides a framework for exploring these alternative possibilities while challenging conventional assumptions about the linear progression of human development. The influence of Atlantean themes on modern spiritual and environmental movements demonstrates how ancient symbols can be reinterpreted to address contemporary concerns about ecological sustainability, social justice, and personal transformation. New Age interpretations of Atlantis often emphasize the integration of spiritual wisdom with technological capability, presenting the lost civilization as a model for achieving harmony between human needs and natural systems. These modern applications of Atlantean symbolism illustrate how mythological narratives can evolve to address changing cultural needs and aspirations. Critical evaluation of Atlantean evidence requires careful distinction between historical possibility, mythological symbolism, and pseudoscientific speculation. The archaeological discoveries demonstrating prehistoric sophistication provide legitimate grounds for reconsidering the plausibility of advanced ancient civilizations. but they do not constitute direct evidence for the specific claims made in Plato's dialogues. The challenge lies in maintaining scientific rigor, while remaining genuinely open to possibilities that may not fit conventional historical paradigms. The methodological approaches developed for investigating other legendary locations provide frameworks for evaluating Atlantean claims that balance skeptical analysis with systematic investigation. The archaeological confirmation of Troy's existence demonstrates that ancient literary sources can contain genuine historical information despite their mythological elements. The standards of evidence required for establishing the historical reality of Atlantis must account for the extraordinary claims in Plato's account, while acknowledging the genuine limitations of archaeological preservation and discovery. The distinction between core historical elements and elaborated details in Plato's account requires careful analysis of which aspects of the narrative most likely preserve genuine historical memory, versus which elements may represent philosophical allegory or literary embellishment. The specific geographical and chronological details may be less reliable than the general themes of an advanced island civilization destroyed by natural catastrophe, themes that align with patterns documented in other ancient traditions and supported by geological evidence for rapid environmental changes. The integration of multiple disciplines, archaeology, geology, oceanography, climatology, and comparative mythology, provides the most promising approach for advancing understanding of Atlantean questions while maintaining appropriate scientific standards. The convergence of evidence from different fields of study offers the possibility of developing comprehensive frameworks accounting for both the specific details of Plato's account and the broader patterns of ancient traditions about lost civilizations and catastrophic environmental changes. The continuing quest for Atlantis ultimately reflects humanity's enduring fascination with its own origins, potential, and destiny. Whether Plato's account preserves memories of an actual historical civilization or represents a powerful philosophical allegory, the narrative continues to inspire investigation, speculation, and reflection about the nature of human achievement and the fragility of civilizational progress. The search for Atlantis has contributed to advances in archaeology, geology, and oceanography, while stimulating broader cultural conversations about environmental sustainability, technological responsibility, and the lessons that can be learned from studying the rise and fall of complex societies. The modern synthesis of scientific investigation and mythological interpretation suggests that the most productive approach to Atlantean questions may involve recognizing both the historical possibilities revealed through archaeological discovery and the symbolic dimensions giving the narrative its enduring cultural significance. Rather than viewing these perspectives as mutually exclusive, the continuing evolution of Atlantean studies demonstrates how ancient mysteries can serve as catalysts for scientific advancement, while preserving their capacity to inspire imagination and reflection about fundamental questions concerning human nature and civilization's future. And so the mystery of Atlantis endures, neither fully confirmed nor finally dismissed, hovering at the edge of knowledge like a city glimpsed through morning fog, real and unreal at once. Whether its towers will ever emerge from the sea, whether its name will one day be attached to coordinates on a map, perhaps does not matter as much as what the searching itself tells us. We are creatures who remember, who mourn what is lost, who look out across dark water and imagine that somewhere beneath the surface, something beautiful and true once existed and might exist still. Let that thought rest gently in your mind now. The waters are quiet. The ancient world is far away. There is nothing you need to do, or find, or remember tonight. Simply breathe, and let the long story settle around you like soft sediment drifting slowly to the ocean floor. You have traveled through centuries, through lost cities and sunken continents, through the dreams of philosophers and the memories of peoples long gone. It is enough. It is more than enough. Rest now. Sleep well, dear listener. Good night.